Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. Over the past 2 to 3 months, I've been dealing with something I never thought I would: sleep paralysis. It's not something I've ever experienced before, and while I had heard about it, living through it is an entirely different feeling. The first 2 incidents happened about a month apart, both on mornings when I didn't have work, most likely weekends or holidays. The first time it happened, I woke up around 8 a.m., still in that groggy state where you're half awake, half asleep. I was lying in bed, my back to the bedroom door, when I felt the blankets being pulled tightly around me. At first, I thought it was my husband, and I remember thinking, what in the world is he doing? I stayed still for a few seconds, trying to figure it out, only to realize that I couldn't move. Then, just as quickly as it started, I regained control of my body. I rolled over, ready to speak to them, but he wasn't there. In fact, he was asleep on the couch in the living room. I found it strange but chalked it up to my first experience with sleep paralysis, a phenomenon I'd only heard about from others. The second time, the experience was eerily similar. Again, I woke up around 8 a.m., lying on my side with my back to the door. I felt more awake this time, but as I lay there, I distinctly heard the sound of the door opening, like my husband was walking into the room. I waited, but nothing happened. I tried to roll over, and that familiar stiffness came over me again, like my body didn't want to move. But just like before, it passed quickly, and I was able to move again. When I turned around, the door was still shut. I felt frustrated that this had happened again, but I rationalized it as the apartment settling, my mind still caught in that hazy, half-awake state. The third incident, however, was different. My husband and I had gone on a short trip to a small resort in New Hampshire. The room was quaint, with a living area, kitchen, and a bedroom off the living space. There was also a bathroom connected to the bedroom. That night, my husband had trouble sleeping, as he often does, and decided to sleep in the living room while I went to bed. It wasn't unusual for him to fall asleep with the TV on or stay in the living area to avoid disturbing me, so I didn't think much of it. I wasn't sleeping well either, waking up several times throughout the night. Around 3:30 a.m., I had a dream so vivid it felt real, and when I woke up, I wasn't sure if I had imagined it or if it was reality. In the dream, I woke up in the same bed, noticing that the lights in the living area were off, which made me think my husband had decided to come to bed. I waited for him to open the door, but nothing happened. Then I raised my head and saw a little girl sitting at the end of the bed. She wore a hood, and the room seemed to grow darker and heavier with each passing second. A deep, paralyzing dread washed over me. I realized I couldn't move, my body was frozen in place, but I couldn't take my eyes off the girl. She began crawling up the bed toward me, her movements deliberate and slow, but terrifying. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I tried to move, but I was completely paralyzed. The fear was suffocating. Then I woke up for real, gasping for air, my heart racing from the dream. This time I could move. I sat up, trembling, nearly jumping out of bed, but I forced myself to stay calm. I used breathing exercises to steady my nerves. Tears stung my eyes as I tried to get a grip on myself. Even after I eventually fell back asleep, the fear lingered, clawing at me. I don't know why this is happening now. I've never experienced anything like it before, not that I can remember. I didn't have night terrors or vivid nightmares as a child. But over the past year, these terrifying dreams have been happening more often. I wonder if it's related to the anxiety that comes in waves. I was diagnosed with mitral valve prolapse, MVP, a few years ago, which occasionally triggers anxiety, though the condition itself doesn't cause many symptoms. I've learned to manage it without medication, something my doctor prefers due to potential side effects. Still, I can't help but wonder why, after all this time, I'm suddenly experiencing these intense dreams and strange occurrences. It feels like my mind and body are betraying me in ways I don't fully understand. Whatever the cause, these episodes have left me feeling unsettled, and I'm more aware than ever of the mysteries of my mind, and maybe even something beyond it. It was the summer of 1995, and I was 6 years old. My older sister, Emily, was 9. My parents had a night out planned, so they arranged for a teenage babysitter, Jessica, who lived just a couple of houses down from ours. We lived in a small 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The kind of neighborhood where the streets were lined with big trees and the air always had a faint smell of freshly mowed grass. The house had 2 bedrooms upstairs and a single bathroom at the top of the stairs. Up until that night, I had never felt scared in that house. It was comfortable, familiar, until that one evening. That night, Emily, Jessica, and I were sitting at the kitchen table, quietly coloring. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house. Then, out of nowhere, I realized I needed to use the bathroom. But it was upstairs, and I was terrified of going up there alone. I asked Emily if she would come with me, but she was deep into her drawings and didn't want to stop. I kept asking, pleading with her to come, but she refused. That's when Jessica, our babysitter, got frustrated. She snapped at me, telling me to stop bothering my sister and go upstairs by myself. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. I remember the feeling of my heart pounding as I slowly made my way up the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the weight of the whole house was pressing down on me. When I reached the top, I froze. The hallway stretched in front of me, dark and silent. The bathroom door stood open, but the room inside was pitch black. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, paralyzed with fear. Slowly, I reached my small hand into the darkness and flipped the light switch. As my hand entered the room, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. I took that last step up and stood in the doorway waiting. The bathroom light above me flickered on, one of those old, buzzing fluorescent tubes. It sputtered, flickering dimly, making the air feel heavier with each buzz. And then, in the dim light, I saw it. Sitting on the rim of the bathtub, there was something wrong. It was like how people picture the devil, bright red, with glowing eyes, horns, and a long, twisted tail. It just sat there, watching me. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stared. The only sound was the hum of the flickering light. I felt frozen, unable to move or scream, my body locked in place. Time felt like it stood still. The flickering light seemed to drag on forever, but it must have only been a few seconds. Finally, the light snapped on fully, and the creature was gone. I don't remember running back down the stairs, but I must have. I remember bursting into the living room, screaming, "The devil is in the bathroom." My sister, startled, ran upstairs to check. She moved the shower curtain, peered into the bathtub, but there was nothing there, just an empty, quiet bathroom. The next thing I remember was my parents coming home. I ran straight to my mom, crying, telling her about what I had seen. She dismissed me, saying I must have imagined it. Confused and frightened, I ran outside and found my dad. I told him the same thing. The devil was in the bathroom. He looked down at me with serious eyes, and without a second of hesitation said, "I believe you." That was the first time I encountered something that I couldn't explain, something that would stay with me forever. It wasn't until years later that I experienced another paranormal event, but the memory of that night will never leave me. Two years ago, after nearly 8 years of putting my dream of having children on hold, my fiancé finally decided he was ready to try. He hadn't been in my life for all those 8 years, but I often wished he had been. We carefully planned everything, and the last possible date for conception was January 26, 2011. I know this because I have been using the fertility awareness method, tracking everything meticulously. On March 9th, I went in for my first ultrasound, filled with excitement, but my heart sank when the doctor delivered the news. I had what's called a blighted ovum, a genetic miscarriage. He explained that something had gone terribly wrong when the egg and sperm met, and the embryo hadn't developed. Instead, I had an empty amniotic sac that had tricked my body into thinking it was pregnant. The doctor also noted that the sac wasn't as far along as it should have been and scheduled another ultrasound a week later to confirm and discuss my options. I was devastated but trying my best to cope. A week later, I returned for the follow-up appointment, and to my surprise, there was a tiny sign of growth, a small lump inside the sac. The doctor advised me to come back in another week. During that waiting period, something extraordinary happened. One Saturday afternoon, I went to the grocery store, just a quick trip to Fred Meyer. After parking, I sat in my car, enjoying a soft pretzel with cheese. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm. Everything felt so calm. Then, out of nowhere, a large, shiny black raven landed between my car and the one next to me. It wasn't uncommon to see ravens in this part of the country, but it was rare to see one up so close. I watched in fascination as the raven hopped around my car. Before I could take in the moment fully, 5 more ravens swooped down and landed around my car. Despite the crowded parking lot, my car was the center of their attention. The first raven hopped onto my hood, tilting its head from side to side, making soft chirping noises, not the usual harsh croaks ravens are known for, but almost like a gentle purring. When it pecked at my windshield, I rolled down the window just a bit and tossed out a piece of pretzel. The raven didn't go for the food immediately. Instead, it hopped down to the ground and moved behind my car. Then, another raven landed on the hood, chirruping softly, just like the first. It took the piece of pretzel, perched on the hood, and stared at me as it ate. After a moment, it flew over to my passenger side mirror, then returned to the hood, where I managed to take a picture before it flew away. There was something odd about that encounter, something that made it feel like the birds were trying to tell me something. As I went on with my day, I noticed ravens everywhere, always 2 or more, always near me watching. It was almost as if they were reassuring me, quietly telling me I wasn't alone. When I went in for my next ultrasound, the doctor surprised me with wonderful news. There was a fetal pole, and it was pulsing. My baby was alive after all. The previous ultrasound had simply been too early to detect anything, and the doctor had miscalculated how far along I was. I left the clinic practically skipping, filled with joy. That afternoon, I visited a friend who had grown up on a Native American reservation in the Southwest. She was highly intuitive, more spiritually connected than I could ever hope to be. As we stood outside her shop, I glanced across the street and saw 2 massive ravens perched on a streetlight. When I pointed them out, my friend told me she hadn't seen any ravens all day until that moment. She suggested I look into their symbolism. The ravens stayed on the streetlight, watching us the entire time. The next day, I started researching ravens. I learned that, while they are often linked to death, they also represent mystery, transformation, and a connection to higher realms. They are known as messengers, keepers of secrets, and guides between worlds. One piece of information hit me hard. You don't choose the raven as a totem animal. The raven chooses you. Another revelation stunned me. My baby's due date aligned with the Native American sign of the raven. That's when it all clicked. The ravens weren't there for me. They were there for my baby. As I reflected on the times I'd seen them, I realized they had been watching me, following me like silent sentries, always there. It felt strange, but also strangely comforting, like loyal guardians keeping a careful eye on me. The next weekend, I went out for errands again. As I drove down a stretch of highway lined with streetlights, I noticed something surreal. Every single overhang was home to at least 2, sometimes 3 or 4 ravens. They didn't move or make a sound as I passed. It felt like a solemn procession, almost like a funeral march. Something about it felt off, but I tried to push the unsettling feeling aside. A week later, I went in for an emergency ultrasound. My worst fear came true. I was having a miscarriage. The baby I had grown so attached to was gone. After that, the ravens weren't as present as before, though I still saw them occasionally. They seemed to appear when I was upset, like gentle reminders to stay open to learning and growth. Now when I see them, I think about their symbolism and try to find meaning in their mysterious presence. While the heartbreak of that time will never fade, the ravens taught me to look for beauty and connection, even in the darkest moments. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. In my early 20s, I worked as part of the behavioral team at a psychiatric hospital in the small town of Silver Springs. The facility had been there for about 25 years, originally serving both children and adults. But about a year before I started, the adult units were shut down and moved to a different hospital. Only the children's units remained, specifically for those in need of acute or residential care. The hospital was a fairly new building, but its design had an old-world charm with long, creaky hallways and heavy, industrial doors that seemed a little too permanent. One of the most unforgettable experiences I had there occurred in an area of the hospital that was no longer in use, a former adult unit. To get to the children's wards, I had to pass through this dark, forgotten wing. The hallways were cluttered with old furniture, broken decorations, and forgotten medical equipment. All the doors to the rooms were locked, the windows covered, leaving the place feeling more like a ghostly memory of what had once been. Each hallway in that wing had thick, steel double doors that required a badge scan to open, ensuring that patients couldn't wander too far. On one particularly quiet morning, as I walked through the deserted corridor, I passed through a couple of these sets of doors, heading toward the children's unit. That's when I saw her. At the far end of the hall, just before the last set of heavy doors, stood a small girl with curly hair. She was staring right at me. The sight was so out of place in that abandoned wing that it stopped me in my tracks. She wasn't supposed to be there, and in that moment, I felt an unexplainable chill run down my spine. My first instinct was to speak to her. "Hey there," I called out gently, trying not to startle her. "Where are the adults? Do they know you're not with them?" She didn't answer. Instead, she giggled, a soft, unsettling laugh, and without another word, she turned and sprinted into one of the locked rooms. I hesitated for a moment, but my concern pushed me forward. I rushed after her, trying to make sense of the situation. When I reached the door to the room she disappeared into, I found it locked. I stood there for a moment, confused. Maybe I was just seeing things. Maybe she had snuck into the room and locked herself in. I wasn't sure, but I needed to know. I swiped my badge and opened the door. The room was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no beds, nothing at all. I checked the small attached bathroom, but it was just as vacant. My stomach dropped. Where had she gone? I quickly grabbed my radio. This is Flower's Growback. I think I saw a little girl, curly hair, in the old 600 unit. Could be a new patient, but I haven't seen her before. I can't find her. Are all the kids accounted for? Within minutes, a team of nurses and a couple of co-workers arrived to help search the unit. We checked every room, every nook and cranny, but all the children were accounted for. Every single one. After the search was called off, my co-workers joked about it, teasing me for getting spooked. "Looks like we got a new client." They laughed, as if I had imagined the whole thing. But later, one of the nurses who'd been working there for over a decade pulled me aside. She gave me a look, not of reproach, but of understanding, which made my skin crawl. "Don't worry about it," she said quietly. "Every female employee sees her eventually. The little girl with the curly hair. She giggles, runs off, and always disappears. I've seen her too. You're not the first." I was speechless. From that point on, I started hearing whispers from the other longtime staff members. They'd pull me aside, one by one, sharing their own encounters with the little girl. Always the same description: curly hair, giggling, running off into thin air. But it didn't stop there. Over time, I began to notice more strange things. Once I felt a tug at the back of my pants, like a tiny hand trying to get my attention. When I turned around, no one was there. Other times, I'd hear the sound of footsteps, small, quick footsteps, running toward me down the hallway. But when I looked, the hallway was empty. The laughter from unseen children echoed from the playrooms, and I could hear faint squeals in the abandoned cafeteria. One night, I went to check on the gym after hearing the sound of a basketball bouncing. I thought maybe a kid had gotten out of their room, so I opened the door. It was pitch black inside. Yet the sounds of the ball bouncing and footsteps continued. I turned on the lights, but as soon as I did, the sound stopped. The gym was empty. The strange part is that no one has ever died at that hospital, not in its history. But that doesn't mean that clients haven't passed away after leaving. Some of these kids had come to us after the hardest moments of their lives, some in the middle of the night or during violent storms. For some of them, this hospital was the only safe place they'd ever known. Maybe it's just residual energy, the echoes of pain and healing that linger. But after all these years, I can't shake the feeling that it's something more. The little girl with the curly hair, giggling as she disappears into locked rooms, she's still out there somewhere waiting. In early 2008, my boyfriend, let's call him Michael, his family, and I moved into an old 3-story home in a quiet town called Pine Lake. To paint a picture of the place, when you first walked through the front door, you entered the living room. A few steps further led you to the kitchen, and from there, a hallway on the left side connected to 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. On the right side, there was a dining room, another bathroom, and stairs leading up to one of the additional bedrooms. What used to be a sitting room but was now a small, converted bedroom. Above that, another set of stairs led to the master bedroom where Michael and I would eventually sleep. At the time, I was 6 months pregnant with our son, Lucas. The first few months felt calm. Life was busy but happy. However, after Lucas was born in late July, little things started happening. Strange noises at night, things shifting on their own, but nothing too terrifying at first. By early 2009, Michael had started working night shifts. I hated being alone at night, but since his family also lived with us, I didn't feel completely vulnerable. That changed one day when Michael's mom went into surgery. Everyone else went to the hospital, leaving me and Lucas alone. I wasn't scared exactly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. That morning, after I put Lucas down for a nap, I went downstairs to grab a broom. Deciding to take a break, I used the bathroom, which was directly below our room. While sitting there, I heard heavy, deliberate footsteps above me, sounds like someone wearing boots. My first thought was, oh, Michael must have come home early. I felt relief, but when I finished up and headed upstairs, I saw something that froze my blood. Sitting at the bottom of the stairs was a small, childlike figure. As soon as I got close, it vanished. I shook it off as my imagination, but when I reached our room, I realized Michael wasn't home. I tried to ignore the unease that lingered, but that moment stuck with me. For the next few months, nothing significant happened, just the occasional bump or creak I could easily dismiss. But as 2011 rolled around, Lucas was 3 years old, and we had turned the spare room into a playroom for him. It was filled with toys, colorful walls, and a cozy rug. One day, while I was downstairs, I overheard Lucas talking to someone. Thinking he was just playing pretend, I didn't pay much attention. Then, I heard him mention a friend named Nick. When Michael asked who Nick was, Lucas casually replied, "He sits on the stairs and scares me. He pushes me down, scratches me, and takes my toys." That worried me. I assured Lucas that he was safe and made an appointment with his doctor, who referred us to a psychologist. But before we could go, the situation worsened. Lucas's toys began moving on their own, some playing music without being touched. The TV would turn on and off, the volume blasting or dropping randomly, and channels would flicker. At one point, I even unplugged the TV, only for it to turn back on while it was still disconnected. That was it. I yelled at whatever was in the house, demanding it leave us alone. The activity stopped for a while, but it wasn't over. On the day of Lucas's psychologist appointment, Michael's mom stayed behind. As we drove back, Michael received a panicked call from her. She begged us to hurry home. When we arrived, she was sitting outside, looking pale and shaken. She explained that she had been in Michael's sister's room when the light went out. Thinking the bulb had blown, she replaced it, but the new one didn't work either. She assumed it was an electrical issue and intended to have Michael's dad check it later. She went into the living room to sew and watch TV, but the TV started acting up, just like ours had. It turned on and off, changed channels, and adjusted the volume by itself. She muttered, "Okay, you can stop now," and to her surprise, the TV went back to normal, and the light in the bedroom flickered back on. She laughed it off and continued sewing, but then she heard Lucas's toys moving and making sounds. Next, she heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps coming from upstairs. Curious, she went to investigate, but as she turned the corner, she was confronted by something she could only describe as a shadowy figure, something that fell off as if it wasn't quite human. It charged down the stairs toward her, and she ran outside, terrified. That was it. We couldn't take any more. We cleansed the house, had it blessed, and moved out within a week. To this day, I wonder what we experienced there. Was Nick some kind of malevolent spirit, pretending to be a child to get closer to Lucas? Or was it something worse, something far darker? One evening in November of 2016, around 11 p.m., I was working late in my recording studio, which is located in the basement of my house in Asheville, North Carolina. I was finishing up a mix for a local band when I decided to take a quick break and grab a drink. My wife, Sarah, was upstairs watching television, and I mentioned I was almost done for the night. After heading back to the control room for a final listen, I stepped outside to clear my head. To reach the side yard, I walked through the basement, past the laundry room, and out through the back door, which opened onto the driveway. As I stepped outside, I checked my phone for any updates from the studio's Facebook page. I didn't see anything urgent, so I locked the screen and slipped it into my back pocket. The air was crisp, the kind of chilly night you'd expect in the Smoky Mountains. The silence around me felt unusual, almost like the stillness had a weight to it, pressing down on me. My side yard is about 15 yards wide, with 2 tall oak trees near the edge of the property. Beyond them lies a dense, overgrown patch of woods that leads down to a small creek, which runs along the edge of a city park. On the other side of the creek, another wooded area rises sharply toward a neighbor's house, which is mostly hidden by trees and vines. The house backs up to a street that runs parallel to mine. As I stood there, something felt off. The usual nighttime sounds, the chirping of crickets, a distant dog barking, the faint hum of traffic, had all disappeared. The silence seemed unnatural, and a chill crept up my spine. I had this unsettling feeling like I wasn't alone, like someone, or something, was watching me. I scanned the yard and the tree line, my eyes falling on a flat rock about 15 yards away. There, hovering just above the ground, was a glowing, smoky figure. My heart skipped a beat. It was about 12 feet tall, shaped vaguely like a giant mummy, with arms, legs, and broad shoulders, but no visible feet. The figure was translucent, and I could faintly see the trees behind it through its form. My mind raced to find a logical explanation, maybe a patch of fog, but the shape was too distinct, too humanoid to be anything other than something else. As I stood frozen, the sensation of being watched grew stronger. My body tensed, my hairs standing on end. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was imagining it, but when I opened them again, the figure was still there. It didn't seem aggressive, just observant, like it was studying me. I quickly pulled out my phone and called Sarah upstairs, asking her to grab a flashlight and come outside. While waiting, I addressed the apparition, trying to keep my voice calm. "It's okay that you're here. We don't mean any harm. We just want to know who you are." Slowly, I turned on the flashlight on my phone and started walking toward it. The figure didn't move as I approached. As I got closer, its smoky form became clearer, but there was no light source around it, nothing to explain how it glowed. It simply illuminated itself from within. When I was about 10 yards away, I spoke again, repeating that I didn't want to harm it. I didn't want to be harmed. Just as I did, the figure began to descend, folding in on itself, slowly sinking into the ground. Within seconds, it was gone. The air around me felt heavy, as though time itself had slowed down. Just as the last trace of the figure vanished, Sarah arrived with the flashlight. She looked around, asking what I was supposed to be looking for, but by then, there was nothing left to see. I took the flashlight from her and scanned the area around the rock. It was pitch dark, and there was no sign of anything unusual. Then, as quickly as the silence had fallen, the night came back to life. The crickets began chirping, a dog barked in the distance, and the hum of traffic returned. The next morning, still shaken, I took a tape measure outside to gauge the size of the figure, using the nearby trees for reference. I estimated it was about 12 feet tall and about 4 feet wide, perfectly proportioned to the shape of a large mummy. I could still remember how the figure seemed to move slightly, like smoke swirling inside a solid shape. Although the apparition didn't feel threatening, it left me with a strange sense of curiosity. I've often wondered if it was connected to the land itself. Our house backs up to a city park that, according to local lore, used to be a burial ground for the Cherokee people centuries ago. Could the figure have been the spirit of someone tied to the area's past? When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my younger sister and I shared a room in our grandparents' old 2-story house on the outskirts of Pine Lake, a quiet town in rural Oregon. The house had been built by my grandfather, a retired mechanic, and it had that old, creaky charm to it. Nothing modern about it. It was nearly 40 years old when this happened, and as far as I know, no one else had ever lived there. The house sat on a large plot of land, surrounded by dense woods that stretched as far as the eye could see, even in the summer months when the trees seemed to swallow the horizon. My grandmother had been in a wheelchair for as long as I could remember, and my grandfather, who had passed away when I was 10, was blind. Despite his blindness, he was the most dependable and comforting presence in my life. He had been the father figure I had always needed. We were close. He was always up for watching old horror and sci-fi movies with me, even though he couldn't see the screen. I would sit beside him and describe everything that was happening, acting like it didn't scare me, even though it did. At night after the shows ended, I would lie in bed, wide awake, thinking about the monsters or ghosts that could be hiding in the shadows. I bring all this up to give some context. Maybe it was my imagination running wild from all the horror films we watched together. Maybe I was just a kid, caught up in the excitement of it all. But the thing I saw, I don't think it was just in my head. One night, my sister and I were lying in bed, chatting and laughing like kids do. Eventually, she fell asleep, but I stayed awake. I was nervous and excited about my piano recital the next day. I remember lying there, my back to the doorway, facing the wall, imagining how I would perform. The only light in the room came from the faint glow of the bathroom, light across the hallway. It was then that I noticed something. At first, it was just a shadow passing by the doorway, as though someone had walked past. I froze. I knew it couldn't be my grandmother because I hadn't heard the familiar sound of her wheelchair. It couldn't be my grandfather either. He never walked around the house alone. I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, and I tried to shake it off. But then, about 15 or 20 minutes later, it happened again. This time, the shadow didn't move. It just stood there, just outside the door. A chill crept down my spine. My heart began to race. I wanted to wake my sister, but I was terrified that if I moved, whatever it was would know I had seen it. I knew I would have to turn around eventually, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Finally, after what felt like forever, I gathered all the courage I had and slowly turned over. Standing in the doorway was a tall, pitch-black figure. It had no face, no features, and no clothing, just a solid, muscular silhouette like someone who spent hours at the gym. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel it looking directly at me. The room felt colder, the air heavier, as though the space between us had thickened. Neither of us moved. I couldn't even speak. I just stared back, paralyzed with fear. Then, without a sound, the shadow vanished, just as suddenly as it had appeared. It disappeared into thin air, like smoke blowing away in the wind. I was frozen for a few moments, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. My hands were shaking and my mind raced. I scooted as close as I could to my sister, almost pinning her to the wall. Somehow, I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a bad dream. I didn't tell anyone and went on with my day, pretending it never happened. But later that night, after my recital, I went to bed early, exhausted. I had just drifted off to sleep when I woke up hungry. I made my way to the kitchen for a snack, and when I returned to my bed, I lay down again, facing the wall, trying to shake off the nerves from the recital. And then, there it was again, the same shadow standing right outside the door. I screamed, waking my sister. The shadow was gone, but the terror remained. I ran into my grandparents' room, shaking, and told them what I had seen. They tried to calm me down, telling me it was just a bad dream. They even let me sleep in their room that night, but I insisted my sister stay with them too. I was afraid it would come after her if I wasn't there. This went on night after night. My grandparents, from a different generation, didn't believe in psychological help. So they had our preacher come over to talk to me. He said it was just my imagination. Too many horror movies and a vivid mind. After that, I wasn't allowed to watch scary movies with my grandpa anymore. But the shadow didn't stop. It continued to appear, night after night. Then, one night when I was 9 years old, I decided I wasn't going to hide anymore. I reasoned that it hadn't hurt me so far, and maybe it wasn't there to hurt me at all. When it appeared again, I waited, gathering my courage. I looked at the figure and said, "What do you want?" It didn't respond, didn't move, didn't make a sound. I asked again, louder this time, but still no answer. Finally, I said, "Leave me alone. Stop bothering me." And just like that, it was gone. I never saw the shadow again. But that night marked something else. Since then, I've always felt a presence. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. I don't see shadows or ghosts anymore, but I can feel them. I'm not sure what I confronted that night, but I believe it's still with me. Maybe it's protective. Maybe it's not. I'm not sure, but it doesn't feel harmful. I'm not looking for a way to get rid of it, but I do wonder, what do you think happened that night? I've been a licensed funeral director and embalmer for over 33 years, holding both a national license and several state licenses. My work has taken me through various aspects of the profession, including time spent as an organ procurement technician and 7 years working with the Helen Keller Eye and Tissue Bank. Currently, I work at a busy funeral home in a small town in South Texas, handling nearly 1,000 cases per year. Despite my hectic schedule, I often visit your ghost stories to read others' experiences. Encouraged by a friend in South Texas, I decided to share one of my own. This particular event occurred several years ago while I was working at a funeral home in a quiet town in northern Alabama. It was a calm evening, just after sunset, when I received a call to meet the county coroner. He was bringing in a murder-suicide case for us to hold temporarily. In that area, funeral homes often rotated decedents, allowing families time to choose where they wanted to proceed. After transferring both bodies into my care, I decided to spend some time in the office, reading through their files and drinking a cold cup of coffee. The soft glow of the desk lamp made the otherwise eerie space feel welcoming, and for a moment, I felt at ease as I read about their lives. About 30 minutes later, I planned to head home for the evening, eager to spend some time with my kids and unwind. But before I could get 10 miles down the road, my phone rang. The decision had been made to keep both cases, and I was asked to return to the funeral home to begin the embalming process. Disappointed, but understanding, I turned my car around, prepared for the long night ahead. When I pulled into the parking lot, I immediately felt it, a sense of unease. The comforting atmosphere I had felt earlier had vanished, replaced by an overwhelming feeling that I wasn't alone. I couldn't shake the sensation, but I pushed it aside, convincing myself it was just my imagination. As I began the embalming process, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. It was as if someone, or something, was standing just outside the door to the adjacent storage room. I had worked many late nights and often dismissed such feelings, but this time was different. While working on the victim of the murder, a wave of deep sadness washed over me. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before, a sorrow so intense it almost brought me to tears. When I moved on to the alleged perpetrator, the sensation didn't fade. Instead, I noticed something. A shadowy, translucent figure slipping along the wall toward the garage door. My logical mind tried to dismiss it, but then the figure stopped, as though it realized I could see it. Slowly, it drifted back toward me, coming to a stop at the foot of the embalming table. And then, I smelled it, the unmistakable stench of decomposition. Anyone who's worked in healthcare or dealt with advanced wounds knows that smell. It's unforgettable, but this was something else, far more intense than any human decomposition I'd encountered in my career. My skin prickled with fear, and I struggled to maintain focus, fighting the instinct to flee. The shadow lingered for a moment before retreating toward the garage door, taking the stench with it as it disappeared. I still don't know what I encountered that night, but it felt connected to the tragic circumstances of the murder-suicide. Whether it was an entity tied to one of the deceased or something else entirely, I didn't stick around to find out once my work was finished. Strangely enough, this wasn't my only brush with the unexplainable. Just this past Tuesday, I stopped by the funeral home after hours to pick up some personal items before my vacation. As I moved through the darkened building, I once again felt that unsettling sensation of being watched. My nerves were already on edge when I heard movement. To my surprise, the intruder turned out to be a very alive, if confused, woman who had somehow snuck in to leave a message for her mother's upcoming service, 2 weeks away. Startled and expecting something far more sinister, I was admittedly short with her as I ushered her out at nearly 9:30 p.m. The next day, feeling guilty, I called to apologize for my reaction. Even after decades in this field, I'm reminded that the line between the living and the dead can often feel thin, and some nights are far more memorable than others. Whether it's the lingering energy of those who've passed or just the heightened awareness that comes with the job, these moments leave a lasting impression. Our house has a basement that's never been properly air-conditioned. It's a place where things pile up, old furniture, boxes of forgotten items, and laundry that doesn't fit anywhere else. It's also where we keep the dogs when we need some space. On cooler evenings, after my wife and kids had gone to bed, I'd retreat down there for some quiet time. It was the perfect spot to chat with friends on the phone, away from the noise of the house. One evening, while chatting with my friends, something strange happened. A dusty old operation board game, tucked away on a nearby shelf, started making noises. But this wasn't the usual buzzer sound. It cycled through its assortment of silly noises, one after the other, over and over again. At first, it startled me, but after a moment, I couldn't help but laugh. My friends on the call heard it too, and we all cracked up. The bizarre occurrence kept happening. Every few weeks, like clockwork, the operation game would randomly activate, playing different sounds without explanation. My family started noticing it too. I assumed it was just some malfunctioning toy, a relic of a forgotten era. Nothing more. But soon, strange things started to happen in the basement that were harder to explain away. It began with small signs, books chewed up, nests tucked into the corners of the garage. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something darting past the corner of my eye. It was fast, small, and I figured it was a squirrel. We'd had them in the attic before, but this was different. Whatever it was incredibly destructive, tearing through things like it had a mission. We tried everything to catch it, traps, poison, even a sound emitter, but it evaded us at every turn. Then, one day, we saw it, a massive rat. It wasn't like any rat I'd ever seen. It moved like a squirrel, climbing straight up the walls with terrifying speed. And it was smart, too smart. It avoided traps, took bait without setting them off, and completely ignored the poison blocks. I had placed the poison high up in the rafters to keep it out of reach of our dogs, but somehow the rat managed to push a block down to the floor. One of the dogs found it first, and we had to rush him to the vet. He recovered, but the sense that something was wrong grew stronger. Around this time, I began noticing something else. Every time I opened the basement door and flicked on the lights, I'd see a shadow at the bottom of the stairs. It was shaped like a person, but whenever I tried to focus on it, it vanished. It didn't happen every time, and if I turned the lights off and back on, it wouldn't appear again. I chalked it up to faulty wiring or my mind playing tricks on me. The tipping point came when my daughter finally spotted the rat in the basement. Armed with a softball bat, she managed to kill it. We cleaned out the basement, thinking that would be the end of it. But no, within a week another rat appeared, just as destructive, just as elusive. That's when it hit me. The rats, the shadow, the strange noises from the operation game. All of these odd occurrences were happening at the same time. And then I remembered something, my old Ouija board. It had been sitting in the basement for years, gathering dust, directly beneath the shelf where the operation game was stored. I hadn't touched it since high school, when we used it at parties to scare each other. I had never taken it seriously, and I certainly hadn't followed the rules. I vaguely remembered reading that you should move the pointer to goodbye to close a session, but I hadn't done that. I'd left the pointer on the board open and waiting. That evening, I decided to act. I went downstairs, dug out the Ouija board, and found the pointer still resting on the board. I moved it to goodbye, said a quick prayer, and asked whatever might be lingering in the house to leave and never return. Then, I carefully stored the pointer separately from the board and tucked it all away. A few days later, we found the second rat, dead, poisoned, and hidden in one of the drawers. After that, the basement was peaceful again. No more shadows at the bottom of the stairs. No more random operation game noises. No more signs of rats. I can't explain it, but I think I have an idea of what happened. Maybe leaving the Ouija board open created a connection, one that allowed something to manifest in strange and subtle ways. It might have used the operation game, influenced the rats, and appeared as a shadow on the stairs. Whatever it was, it's gone now. We burned sage in the house, especially in the basement, and even planted some sage there for good measure. I've done my research since then, and I'm better prepared if anything like this ever happens again. I still don't have any concrete answers, but I'm just relieved that the strange events have stopped. It's good to have the basement, and my peace of mind, back to normal. My grandparents, shortly after they married, bought a large plot of land on the edge of a small town, just outside of Pine Lake, a place where my grandmother had grown up. Together, they built a modest home using old bricks salvaged from the ruins of the Great Chicago Fire. The marks of that fire can still be seen etched into the house's brickwork, a quiet reminder of its past. The house was always full of history. In the back bedroom, there's an old trunk filled with artifacts, a mix of Civil War-era buttons from both Union and Confederate soldiers, as well as a collection of Native American items. My grandmother would often take walks around the property, and over the years, she discovered many of them. An expert once examined these finds, dating most of them to be between 3,000 and 5,000 years old, belonging to the Cherokee who once lived in this region. Growing up, I spent just as much time there as I did at my own house. In fact, I even moved in for a few months to help my grandmother recover after hip surgery. But there's one thing that has always been clear. This house is not just old, it's haunted. The first time anyone saw what we call the woman in white was when my mom was a teenager. One evening, she was startled awake by their new puppy, which was growling and barking at the foot of her bed. Annoyed but curious, she switched on the bedside lamp, and that's when she saw her. A young woman dressed in a white nightgown from another time, standing silently at the end of the bed, staring at my mom without blinking. My mom screamed and my grandfather rushed in. By the time he opened the door, the woman was gone. My mom peered out from behind her hands and confirmed it. The figure had vanished. My grandfather brushed it off as a bad dream, but my mom knew better. She stayed awake the rest of the night, the lamp burning bright and the puppy still growling at something unseen. The woman didn't show up again, but that was just the start of her presence in the house. Over the years, I, my grandmother, and even a few friends have had encounters with her. One time, when my grandmother and I were the only ones home, I was cleaning the bathroom when I heard what sounded like footsteps running down the hallway. Thinking it was my grandmother, I poked my head out to see, but what I saw was something completely unexpected. A thick, swirling column of smoke about the size of a person rushing past me down the hall. It passed so close to me that I felt the breeze from it move my hair. Then just as quickly, it was gone, leaving nothing behind. I told my grandmother, expecting her to be startled, but she only nodded calmly. "Oh, that's just the smoke tower," she said. "It's been around for years. It usually shows up in the afternoon." Another time, I saw the woman in white again. It was around the holidays, and we had family visiting. We were all in the living room watching a movie when I looked toward the hallway and saw her standing just at the edge of the room. She was exactly how my mom had described her, young, blonde, and in that white nightgown. She stood casually against the wall, smiling softly, almost as if she were part of the laughter in the room. She didn't seem to notice me, and when she turned to walk into the kitchen, she simply disappeared. When I asked the family about it later, no one else had seen her. She's interacted with the house too. Once we hung a family photo on the wall, only to find it neatly placed on a chair the next day. Another time, after we put up a picture of my great-great-grandmother, the wardrobe beneath it would open and close on its own for days before finally stopping. It hadn't happened before, and it never happened again after that. There are times when I feel her presence, especially when I'm cleaning. It's as if she's standing right next to me, or just behind me, making sure everything is in its place. In those moments, I'll softly say, "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Sometimes, I'll feel a gentle tug on my hair or hear a small object fall, as if she's acknowledging me. Over the years, some of my family members have seen her enter their rooms at night or wake up to find her sitting quietly at the edge of their bed, watching them as they sleep. My mom was terrified of her as a teen, but I've never sensed any hostility from her. If anything, she feels protective, almost like a guardian. Who is she? Why is she here? Is she connected to the Civil War buttons or the Native American artifacts? Maybe she has some deeper connection to the land or this house. Whatever the reason, she seems to care about this place and us. It's a story about my mom and dad. My mom passed away unexpectedly in 2006, leaving an aching void in our family. It was especially hard on my dad. The day she passed felt like something inside him went dark. His once bright blue eyes that were always full of life, lost their spark. My dad was the kind of man who loved being outdoors. He spent his days working in the garden, fixing up his old classic cars, or tinkering in the shed. He was always busy, never one to sit still. But after Mom's death, things changed. It was like the energy that had kept him going slowly drained away. In 2009, my then husband and I had just moved into a new house. I was sick with the flu, barely able to get out of bed. It was one of those days where the fever makes everything feel like it's happening in slow motion. That evening, around 6 or 7 p.m., my dad showed up unexpectedly. I was lying in bed, barely awake, when my husband nudged me and said, "Your dad's here and wants to see you." I was surprised. My dad didn't like driving after dark, especially since his vision wasn't great. I dragged myself out of bed to see what was going on. When I opened the door, my dad explained that he had been working in the yard earlier that day. While pulling weeds, his cell phone fell into a bucket of water. He tried drying it out in rice, but it wasn't working. Since he disconnected his landline after Mom's passing, he was left without a phone, and that wasn't something he could go on with for long. I had a drawer full of old phones from past upgrades, but we had just moved, and I had no idea where the box was. I told him, "You'll be fine for one night without a phone, Dad. I'll find it first thing in the morning." He agreed, saying, "I can make it one night." I gave him a quick hug and went back to bed, telling him I loved him as he headed home. But around 1 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my mom's voice. I didn't see her, but I heard her so clearly that it sent a chill through me. "Get your father a phone," she said. I thought it might be a fever dream, or maybe my illness was playing tricks on me. But then, a couple of minutes later, I heard her again, louder, more insistent. "Get your father a phone." Her voice jolted me out of bed, and I startled my husband awake. I didn't mention the voice to him. I didn't want him thinking I was losing my mind. Instead, I started looking through the boxes of old phones. He asked why I was suddenly hunting for a phone, since I told Dad I'd take care of it in the morning. I didn't answer, just kept digging through the boxes until I found 3 phones that could work with Dad's SIM card. My husband, who'd never been one to miss anything, insisted on coming with me, though I still don't know why. We drove over to my dad's house and let ourselves in. He was asleep in his recliner, but he woke when he heard the door. His confusion was clear as he asked, "What are you doing here so late?" "I just couldn't shake the feeling that you needed a phone, just in case something happens," I said, trying to explain without telling him about my mom's voice. I found one of the phones, got it set up with his SIM card, and plugged it in to charge before heading back home. At around 3:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was my dad. "Julie," he said, "I'm not feeling well. I've been throwing up, and my stomach's hurting." When Dad says his stomach hurts, you know it's serious. He had a high pain tolerance, so this was worrying. I rushed over and got him to the hospital in less than 30 minutes. Turns out, his intestines had twisted, causing him to vomit bile. The doctor said he was just hours away from becoming septic. If we hadn't brought him in when we did, it could have been fatal. My mom saved his life that night. Even from beyond the grave, she made sure he got that phone. Later, I told my dad about hearing her voice. He listened quietly, and then, to my surprise, he broke down in tears. My dad wasn't the type to cry, but in that moment we both knew, just like I did, that Mom was still watching over us. When I was entering 6th grade, my mom, our 2 dogs, and I moved to Pine Lake, Alabama, to start over after her messy divorce from her 3rd husband. The house we bought wasn't anything extravagant, just a modest 3-bedroom, 1-bath built in the 1800s. It had thick stone walls, original hardwood floors, and crystal doorknobs that added a touch of old-world charm. It was tucked in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by older folks, and for a while, it seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start. We were all eager to settle in, so much so that when the previous homeowner came by to pick up some old mail and refused to step inside the yard, we thought nothing of it. She mentioned that she had bought the house for herself and her fiancé, but tragically he passed away in a car accident before they could move in. She also casually mentioned that the previous owners had died in the house of natural causes. Back then, none of it seemed particularly strange. At first, everything went smoothly. I made the usual adjustment to my new school, and my mom found work. We settled into our routine, and things seemed normal. But looking back, I can't pinpoint the exact moment things started to feel off. I tried to brush it off as my imagination playing tricks on me. Often, I'd catch a glimpse of what seemed like a tiny, dog-like creature darting from the corner of my eye. I would think it was one of our dogs, but then I'd realize neither our Pomeranian nor our Chihuahua was even in the room. The first time I couldn't deny what was happening was when my mom and I were in the dining room talking. At the exact same moment, we both turned our heads to follow a small, dog-sized figure as it dashed into the living room. My mom asked right away, "Did you see that too?" It turned out she had been seeing the same thing, but hadn't mentioned it before. That was only the beginning. The situation escalated when my aunt and uncle came to stay with us on their way to Florida for a NASCAR race. They slept on an air mattress in the living room. One night, the creature appeared again, this time crawling onto their mattress while they were lying on it. Startled, they looked around for a dog, but there was nothing. My uncle, trying to brush it off, suggested it might have been a huge nutria rat, but he swore he would never stay at our house again. At that time, I was sharing a bed with my mom, as we only had one bed after losing most of our furniture in Hurricane Katrina. One night, we both felt a dog jump onto the bed and walk across our legs. My mom said, "Ali, grab the dog and put it in the kennel." The kennel was right next to the bed, so I didn't think anything of it. I reached down to grab the pup, but before I could, it jumped off the bed and scurried under it. I quickly turned on the light to find it, but when I looked under the bed, I froze. Both dogs were in their kennel, sound asleep. I screamed, scrambling back onto the bed, trembling. My mom checked under the bed, but there was nothing there. A couple of weeks later, I was doing homework in the living room when I heard my mom calling my name frantically. I rushed to her room, only to stop dead in my tracks. Hovering near the doorway was a glowing green orb. It moved up and down across the floor, along the walls, and through the center of the room. I was terrified. I jumped into bed with my mom, furious that she had called me into the room with it. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a light trick or a laser pointer, but nothing made sense. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the orb vanished. Another time, my mom's friend stayed over with us. We made her a pallet on the floor in our room. After a peaceful movie night, we all went to bed. In the middle of the night, her friend woke up screaming. She claimed that someone had been sitting on her chest, choking her. But when we turned on the lights, the room was empty. She refused to stay with us again. The most terrifying experience came after I got my own room. One night, I woke up to the bed shaking, and when I looked up, I saw a 7-foot-tall, hooded figure standing next to me. Its hand was extended toward me, as if it were beckoning me. I was frozen, too scared to move, too scared to scream, but I knew I was awake. I didn't take its hand. I couldn't. To this day, I believe that if I had, I wouldn't be here to tell you this story. My mom had finally had enough. We tried everything, blessing the rooms, burning sage, even bringing in a priest. Nothing worked. The strange occurrences only continued. Eventually, my mom put the house on the market, and we made plans to move back to Mississippi. It took over a year to sell the house, and during that time, my mom's coworker agreed to check on it. That didn't last long. One night, she and her boyfriend went over to the house. While they were in the bedroom, she saw the same 7-foot-tall figure standing in the doorway, blocking their way out. Her boyfriend saw it too. They both said it felt like the figure was forcing them to leave. After what felt like an eternity of staring, it finally vanished. They never returned. After we moved, the house changed owners multiple times, eventually going into foreclosure. The last time I drove by it was a few months ago, the first time since 2006. I saw that the garage had burned down. I can't help but wonder if the people who lived there after us experienced the same terrifying things we did. I'll probably never know what haunted that house on Bradley Drive, but whatever it was, I hope I never have to encounter it again. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. In 2015, my 3 children and I moved into a rental house on the outskirts of Pine Lake, Georgia. It was a modest home nestled among the trees, and for the first year, everything seemed completely normal. But as time went on, small, unexplainable things began to happen that made me question if we were truly alone. It started with subtle occurrences, tapping on windows, items being misplaced. These moments were odd but not alarming. At first, I dismissed them, chalking them up to my imagination or simple forgetfulness. But then, things became more distinct. I'd hear my phone hit the floor repeatedly while I was home alone. Every time, I'd find it exactly where it should have been, untouched. By then, I had come to terms with the possibility that we might have an unseen guest. Strangely, I never felt any negative energy, so I wasn't worried about our safety. Eventually, my children began having their own encounters. One night, my teenage daughter came to me, frustrated. "Why do you keep messing with my door?" she asked. I was confused. She explained that she'd shut her door multiple times, only to find it slightly open again each time she turned around. After checking the door and confirming there was no way it could open on its own, I told her about my experiences. I reassured her that there was nothing to fear and suggested that if she ever felt uncomfortable, she could politely ask the presence to leave. Not long after, my oldest son had his first encounter. One night, after I had put him to bed, I heard him talking. "What? Come in." When I checked on him, he told me that someone had been tapping on his window. He thought it was coming from his door at first. I went outside to see if there were branches or something else causing the noise, but there was nothing there. Like with my daughter, I told him about the entity. We all grew to accept its presence, but we avoided talking about it much inside the house, and we never taunted it. Over time, the encounters quieted down. During this period, I started fostering dogs through my job at a local veterinary clinic. One of them, a 3-year-old Yorkie named Baxter, quickly became part of the family. One evening, while I was watching a movie on the couch, Baxter and I were snuggled up together. He was fast asleep when suddenly, his head shot up, and his eyes locked onto a blank spot on the wall in front of us. He stood up on my lap, staring intently. At first, I thought he might have heard something outside and dismissed it. Then I noticed his trembling. The hair on his back was standing straight up, and a deep growl rumbled from him. A sound I'd never heard from a Yorkie before. His growls turned into snarls, and with every breath, he let out sharp barks. He jumped down, placing himself between me and the wall, barking and pacing in protective mode. He'd take a few steps forward, then back up, never taking his eyes off the same spot. When he jumped back onto my lap, trembling and growling, I tried to comfort him, but every time I touched him, he flinched as if I'd startled him. Once, he nearly snapped at me out of pure fear. Then, without warning, he jumped off the couch and darted through the left entrance into the kitchen, still growling. I could hear his nails clicking on the floor as he moved toward the right entrance, the one closest to where he'd been staring. What happened next sent chills down my spine. I heard silence for a few seconds, then a sharp yelp. Baxter bolted back through the kitchen, through the left entrance, and into my lap. He was shaking uncontrollably, his wide eyes darting back to the wall occasionally. I was terrified for him, thinking it might have been a snake or a rat. I searched the entire area, checking for any signs of what could have scared him. I even examined him to make sure he hadn't been bitten. I found absolutely nothing. The next day, I stood in the middle of the house and firmly asked the presence to leave. I told it that it was no longer welcome in our home. I didn't know what else to do, but I hoped it would work. Since that day, we haven't experienced any further encounters. Baxter is back to his usual self, and our home feels peaceful again. I'll never forget those moments, though. They were enough to make me a firm believer that animals can see and sense things we cannot. I'm grateful nothing harmful ever happened, and that I was able to use the experience to teach my children how to respect the unseen. It's a memory that will always stay with us. It was a warm, muggy summer night in 1996, the kind of night where the air feels thick and the cicadas hum just a little louder than usual. My girlfriend, now my wife, and I were driving back from a gig I'd played just outside of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. At the time, I was a musician living in Knoxville, and the late-night drives down quiet back roads were something I was all too familiar with. We left Oak Ridge around 2 a.m., the roads nearly empty, with only the occasional passing car. Dark clouds were rolling in from the west, promising a storm. At a small gas station off Highway 62, we stopped for water and snacks to stay awake. Inside, the clerk casually mentioned a tornado warning in the area. "Tornadoes aren't all that rare around here," I reassured my girlfriend as we climbed back into the car. But even as I said the words, a small, uneasy feeling stirred inside me, a sense that was hard to shake. The Clinch River shimmered under the pale moonlight as we crossed into the sleepy town of Oliver Springs, a small, quiet community tucked into the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. The road narrowed into a two-lane highway, Highway 61. The air was thick with stillness. There were no streetlights, no sign of life, just the dark, empty stretch of asphalt ahead. For a while, it felt as though we were the only people left in the world. The soft rhythm of rain tapping against the windshield mixed with the gentle hum of the car's engine. My girlfriend flicked through the radio stations, finally landing on a weather update. Static crackled before a meteorologist's voice came through, warning of a storm moving through the region. Then, out of nowhere, headlights appeared in the distance. At first, they were just 2 points of light slicing through the darkness. But as we got closer, something seemed off. The beams weren't horizontal, they were vertical, casting an eerie glow against the trees. My heart began to race. I slowed the car, rolling down the window to get a better look. There it was, a brand new red SUV, tipped over on its side at the edge of the road. Its headlights were still shining brightly, illuminating the trees around it, and the engine hummed faintly. The driver's door was wide open, swaying gently in the wind. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there? Do you need help?" Silence. The scene didn't make sense. No skid marks, no broken glass. It was as if the SUV had simply tipped over, landing there without a scratch. A chill ran through me, and I glanced at my girlfriend. Her face mirrored my unease. We decided to keep moving, hoping to come across a sheriff or someone who could help. But just a few miles later, we saw something that made me tighten my grip on the steering wheel. Another SUV, a dark green one, was completely upside down in a shallow ditch. Like the first, it was pristine. The headlights were on, casting long shadows over the ground. The engine was still running, humming softly. The driver's door was wide open. No damage, no debris, no sign of life. The air in the car felt heavier now. The unease had turned to something deeper, a quiet, unspoken fear. Neither of us said a word. The storm was picking up. The wind howled through the trees. The rain began to pour harder. And then we rounded a bend. At first, I thought the road was flooded. It shimmered under the headlights, moving in a way that didn't seem right. But as we got closer, I realized what we were seeing. Frogs. Thousands of frogs. They covered the entire road and shoulders, hopping in every direction. It was like a living carpet, stretching on for what seemed like miles. The sight was otherworldly. The sound, tiny, wet plops as the tires rolled slowly forward, was unsettling. We couldn't avoid them. My tires crunched over the frogs, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. My girlfriend stared out the window, her face ghostly pale. "What's going on?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. Finally, the frogs thinned out, and the road returned to its eerie stillness. We drove the rest of the way in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts, shaken to the core. When we reached the intersection of Highway 61 and Interstate 40, we pulled into a gas station under the harsh glow of the fluorescent lights. The ordinary hum of the station was strangely comforting after what we just encountered. The next morning, I tried to make sense of everything. I called meteorologists, wildlife experts, even a friend who dabbled in the paranormal. No one could explain the frogs. Some suggested that a tornado or storm surge might have displaced them, but there had been no tornado, no flooding. As for the SUVs, there were no accident reports from that night. No witnesses, no trace of any of it. Even now, all these years later, I still can't explain what happened that night on Highway 61. It wasn't terrifying, exactly, more unsettling. The kind of thing that sticks with you, lingering in the back of your mind, asking questions that never seem to have answers. What would you have done if you were in my place? Have you ever had an experience you couldn't explain? I've worked as a preschool teacher at Pine Hill Preschool for the past few years, and it's truly a wonderful place. Nestled in a small, quiet town surrounded by towering oak trees, the school is part of a charming church. Everything about it feels warm and welcoming, a place where kids feel safe and loved. But every now and then, I can't help but wonder, could it be haunted? When I first started working here, I was warned by a coworker who left soon after. With a playful grin, she said, "This place is haunted, I swear." She had a sarcastic, teasing sense of humor, always lighthearted, never over the top. So I thought it was just some new employee hazing. My boss, however, seemed less amused. "Just ignore her," she said. "Please don't quit." I laughed it off at first, but as time passed, I began to experience things that made me question if maybe my coworker wasn't just joking after all. A few months ago, I was promoted from a traveling aide to the lead teacher, which meant I finally had my own classroom. I loved the idea of having my own space to manage, but that's when the strange occurrences began. Every day before leaving, I'd lock all the cabinets in my room. I bought the locks myself, and only I knew the combinations. But when I came in the next morning to unlock them, everything inside had been rearranged. Not only that, it would be more organized than I had left it. Sometimes, things would even be moved to different cabinets. I thought maybe a coworker was helping out, so I asked my boss if she knew who might be doing it. She suggested I ask around. I did, asking every single coworker, and no one admitted to it. The thing is, no one else could have gotten into the cabinets without the combinations, but I tried to dismiss it. After all, I always try to explain away what can be explained. Then, one evening, I was helping out in another teacher's classroom. It was late, and only 2 kids remained in the whole school. I was watching them while their teacher left early. At one point, the boys reached for some Bibles that had been left out. "Excuse me, boys," I said, "those belong to your teacher, not us." They giggled and dropped the books onto the floor. As soon as the books hit the ground, something odd happened. A jack-in-the-box on a nearby shelf fell too. Startled, I turned to look and saw what I can only describe as short, heat-like waves shimmering next to the toy. They flickered for a moment before disappearing entirely. That would have been strange enough, but a few weeks later, one of my coworkers, who doesn't believe in ghosts, casually mentioned that the teachers in the toddler room actually believe it's haunted. She added, "Apparently, they think it's the ghost of a former teacher, but who believes stuff like that? In a church, of all places." Curious, I asked one of the toddler teachers about it. She explained that a couple of years ago, a teacher from the infant room had tragically passed away in a car accident. Since then, they'd noticed odd things. Cribs moving when no one was around, sippy cups that had been left in the sink suddenly locked away in cabinets, faint whispering, and even the sound of giggling. It all sounded like something you'd hear at a sleepover, until something happened to me. Just yesterday, I went into the infant room to check on one of the newer babies who had been fussy. I told the infant teacher I'd come back in 15 minutes, planning to take the baby for a walk outside. I ended up running late, though, and clocked out about 30 minutes past my lunch break. As I was leaving, I noticed one of the 2-year-olds wasn't asleep. He was just staring off into space. I walked over to check on him, and he looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "She asked if you'll get the baby," he said. I froze. "What did you say?" He repeated himself as calm as ever. "That cute baby needs to go outside." There's no way he could have known what I had said to the infant teacher. He hadn't been anywhere near the conversation, and there was no way he could hear the baby crying from across the school. I don't know what's going on here. It's not something that frightens me, not yet, but it's hard to ignore. Maybe my old coworker wasn't just joking after all. What do you think? Could there really be something lingering in this cheerful little church school? Or is my mind just playing tricks on me? I had just started working at a funeral home in a small town, and things were much different back then. There were no cell phones, no pagers, nothing like that. When you were on call, you had to stay at the funeral home all night. For me, that meant spending nights alone. sometimes 4 or 5 nights a week, with no one but the quiet halls and the cold air of the building to keep me company. I was the only embalmer for the funeral home, which handled more than 400 cases a year. It wasn't unusual to feel like the place had become a second home, though it was never quite comfortable. When you spend so much time in a place like that, you get used to its rhythms. Most of us didn't bother turning on the lights at night. The soft glow from the hallways or the adjacent rooms was enough to navigate by. It had a strange, almost calming feel, even in the dead of night. One night around 3 a.m., I was working in the embalming room. It had been a long week, and once again, I found myself alone in the building. The embalming room had 3 tables, several dressing tables, and 2 doors, one leading to the garage and the other to the main hallway. That night, the tables were full, with 6 or 7 bodies laid out on the dressing tables and 2 or 3 more on the embalming tables. I was focused on a young man who had died in a car crash, working silently when I first heard it. It started as a faint murmur, a soft conversation between a man and a woman just outside the door. Their voices were low, barely audible, but I could tell they were talking. At first, I thought it was one of the funeral directors stopping by, but who would be here at 3 a.m.? Curious, I walked over to the door and opened it. The voices immediately stopped. The hallway was empty. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. There was nothing in the hallway, no signs of anyone having passed by. Shrugging it off as fatigue, I went back to my work. A few minutes later, the conversation began again, the same low voices, just outside the door. This time, I opened the door quickly, hoping to catch whoever it was. But again, the voices stopped, and the hallway remained silent and empty. By now, I was more puzzled than scared. It had been a long week, and I figured it was just the exhaustion messing with me. I closed the door and tried to focus on my work. Then came the scream. It was sudden and unmistakable, a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream, echoing down the hallway. It sounded like someone in agony, as if they were being tortured. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't something I could ignore. I immediately thought that maybe someone had fallen asleep in one of the viewing rooms and woke up in the dark funeral home alone. That kind of thing had happened before, so I figured I would find them, calm them down, and let them out. The hallways were dim, lit only by the faint glow from lamps in the lobby and viewing rooms. As I walked through the building, I checked each of the rooms, pausing by each casket. The rooms were quiet. No one was there. Thinking maybe they had run out through one of the back doors, I checked every exit. Each door was locked securely. That's when I realized something strange. The security alarm hadn't gone off. No one could have left the building without setting it off. Confused and now a little shaken, I decided to return to the embalming room. But just as I reached for the door, something caught my eye. At the far end of the hallway, the light from the lobby lamps flared bright, casting an intense glow toward the embalming room door. I froze, staring at the light. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. There was no way anyone had left. The doors were locked, and the alarm was silent. Yet I had heard voices, heard screams, and now this strange flare of light. Feeling a cold shiver crawl up my spine, I stepped back into the embalming room. Oddly enough, it was the only place in the building that made me feel safe, so I stayed there the rest of the night, trying to ignore everything else and focus on my work. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. Was I just exhausted, or was there something else going on? Whatever it was, I've never been able to shake the feeling of standing there in that empty hallway, hearing voices and screams that came from nowhere, and seeing that strange light flare in a way that defied reason. What do you think happened that night? Could it have been something beyond explanation? Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Hi, my name's Emily, and I'm from a small town in West Virginia. Over the past 6 or 7 months, strange things have been happening at our house. I'm not sure what's causing it, but the experiences have been unsettling, to say the least. One of the first incidents involved my grandmother, who's the biggest skeptic I know. She came to visit one evening, and while she was in the bathroom, she heard a strange noise coming from the vent in the ceiling. She described it as sounding exactly like a coyote laughing. Now we live in a rural area. Coyotes are common here, but this wasn't like any sound I've ever heard from them. I asked if it could have been a bobcat, but she was sure it wasn't. She's familiar with the sounds around here, and this was different. I looked into it, but the only animal that makes a sound even close to what she described is a hyena. Needless to say, it really creeped me out. Another odd thing happens whenever I'm out in the backyard, day or night. I'll hear what sounds like something large moving around in the woods. Sometimes it sounds like something striking a tree, like a hollow thud. There's an old story around here about a house that burned down in those woods years ago, but I don't know if it's connected. Lately, my dog has been barking at night, which is unusual for her. Normally, she only barks at people she doesn't recognize, but now it's almost constant. This has happened to me twice now, most recently about a month ago. It was early in the morning. Around 2 or 3 a.m. I woke up because I felt 3 pats on my upper shoulder, almost like someone trying to comfort me. I was facing the wall, and my husband was turned the other way. I immediately asked, "Why did you pat me?" But he was fast asleep. I felt can do this before, so I assumed it was him, but this time I'm not so sure. One evening, I came home to find both my dog and cat were nowhere to be seen. This was incredibly strange because my dog is always at the door, tail wagging, and my cat is usually right beside her. We called for them, but neither of them came. Eventually, we found my dog hiding behind the dryer, refusing to come out. Her tail wasn't wagging at all. My cat was under an end table and wouldn't let me touch him. I've had him since he was a kitten, and he's never been shy around me, but every time I reached for him, he backed away. When I finally picked him up, his body was stiff as a board, almost like rigor mortis. Thankfully, this hasn't happened again. We used to have a hook lock on the door of our smaller bathroom instead of a regular knob lock. For some reason, the hook would randomly fling out of the loop, unlocking the door and letting it swing open. We thought it might be drafts, but after testing that theory, we ruled it out. My husband even tried pushing the door from the outside while it was locked, and it wouldn't budge, no matter how hard he pushed. I've seen it happen once, but it kept happening, so we eventually removed the lock. Occasionally, things like clothes, blankets, or stuffed animals that have been sitting untouched for weeks will suddenly fall. It doesn't feel like it's just the house settling. One time, I thought I heard my cat jump off the kitchen counter, but when I looked, he was asleep on the floor. Sometimes, I hear strange noises outside my bedroom window at night. My TV will randomly turn off with no timer set, and my cat will sit and stare into the hallway or kitchen, like he's watching something I can't see. The most unsettling thing happened at the end of our driveway. We saw a strange, black, enormous figure on all fours. It didn't look like any animal I've ever seen before. It was there, and then it was gone, just like that. That's pretty much what's been happening at our house. I'm not sure what's causing all of this, but it's enough to make us feel uneasy. To this day, I find it almost impossible to talk about what happened in the apartment in Pine Lake, Georgia. The fear of what could have happened to me, or worse, to my 3-year-old son, Lucas, still hangs over me. I've always believed in ghosts. Back in late 2012, I was finally beginning to rebuild my life. As a single mother who lost both my parents at the age of 14, life had been anything but easy, but things were finally looking up. I had secured a small apartment through the local housing program, a cozy, affordable place in Pine Lake, a town just outside Atlanta. The apartment was everything I'd hoped for: 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a living room, and a kitchen that felt just right. My room was right across from Lucas's, which gave me a sense of comfort, as we'd always shared a space before. Life was finally settling into a rhythm. a steady job, Lucas in daycare, and a reliable car to get me where I needed to go. Everything seemed perfect. By December, however, things began to take a turn. The apartment always felt cold, no matter how high I cranked up the heat. I was exhausted all the time, but I figured it was the long hours and the never-ending commute. One evening, while Lucas and I were watching cartoons in the living room, I heard a loud noise from the bathroom. It sounded like something heavy had fallen. I glanced over at Lucas, who was sitting on the floor, engrossed in his cartoons, and walked to the bathroom to check. When I opened the door, I froze. Half of the shower curtain had been pulled out of the tub, and there was a small handprint imprinted in it. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself Lucas must have done it earlier and I didn't notice. But I couldn't explain the noise. Shaken, I shrugged it off and moved on with my night. For a time, things seemed normal again, but the cold never went away. Lucas settled into his room, playing with his toys as usual. But in February 2013, everything changed. One day, after Lucas had a tantrum, I sent him to his room for a timeout. Barely 5 minutes later, I heard his scream, a blood-curdling sound of sheer terror. I rushed to his room and found him standing beside his bed, clutching his cheek, tears streaming down his face. I knelt down and asked what happened. He pointed past me, shaking, and said, "He hit me, Mom. The boy hit me." I turned, but the room was empty. When I told him no one was there, he screamed again, "He's right there, Mom. The boy, he hit me." When he moved his hand, I saw a large red mark on his cheek. My heart sank. Something wasn't right. That night, I let Lucas sleep in my room. Around 2 or 3 a.m., we were startled awake by a loud bang coming from his room. Then Lucas grabbed my hand, pointing at the door. "There's a man, Mom." "There, Mom, the man," he said, voice shaking. I couldn't see anything, but I turned on the light and held him close, trying to comfort him. Eventually, we both fell asleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The strange events kept happening. Lucas would play with his toys, arranging them as if another child were there. He often spoke about the boy he was playing with. When I asked him who the boy was, he would point to an empty spot and say, "That boy. He likes to play with me." At first, I thought it was just an imaginary friend, but one evening, Lucas turned to me and said, "The boy is sitting next to you. Don't be scared, he likes you." Then, in a quiet whisper, he added, "But the man scares him. The man doesn't like us." From that moment, everything changed. The atmosphere in the apartment became unbearable. Lucas refused to stay in his room, saying the boy wasn't nice anymore. Most nights he woke up crying, saying the man was at the door and he was mad. I began to feel as though something was watching us, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see anything. The lights started malfunctioning. Bolts would burn out within hours. Cold drafts surrounded us, and strange bangs echoed from Lucas's room. Desperate, I reached out to a friend who had some experience with the paranormal. She suggested I go through each room and demand that the spirits leave, telling them they weren't welcome. Reluctantly, I followed her advice. That night, for the first time in months, Lucas didn't wake up crying. The apartment felt warm, peaceful even. The next morning, my phone rang. It was my friend, crying uncontrollably. She told me she'd been out with her mother, who was driving ahead of her. While they were on the road, her mother called her, asking about the little boy sitting in the passenger seat of her van. My friend looked, but there was no one there. When she realized what had happened, she called me immediately. I confessed that I had followed her advice the night before, and she broke down even more. She told me to leave the apartment. Whatever was there was powerful and dangerous. The next day, I came home early with Lucas. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the couch and dozed off. Hours passed, and then I heard Lucas crying and talking to someone near his room. His voice got closer and closer, pleading, "Mom, wake up. Move." I tried to move, but I couldn't. I was frozen, completely paralyzed. It felt as if something was pressing down on me, suffocating me, making it hard to breathe. Lucas climbed onto the couch, shaking me, screaming for me to wake up. But I couldn't respond. Suddenly, the weight lifted, and I shot up, gasping for air. I grabbed Lucas, my keys, and my bag, and we fled the apartment. As I drove away, I glanced back and saw the lights in the apartment turn off on their own. I didn't return for 2 weeks. When I did, Lucas pointed down the hallway and said, "The boy is mad, Mom." That was it. I packed up our things and moved to a friend's house out of state. To this day, I don't speak about what happened. Lucas, now 9, has no memory of it, and I pray he never does. I've kept the photos from the apartment, and in many of them, strange, shadowy figures can be seen in the background. I turned down offers from friends to investigate the apartment. I didn't want to know what was still there. The memories are enough for me. I work at an old hospital with a history that dates back quite a long time. It was originally established in 1918 as a tuberculosis, TB, sanatorium. Back then, there wasn't even a proper building, just a makeshift camp with tents, where patients stayed because it was believed that fresh air helped fight the disease. In 1926, after the camp was destroyed by a fire, construction began on an actual hospital building. As the number of patients grew, a second hospital was built across the street in 1953, where I currently work. By the mid-1970s, advancements in TB treatment made long-term stays unnecessary, so by 1979, the hospital shifted its focus. It started treating conditions like black lung disease and diabetes, and it also became a detox center for alcoholism. As the hospital's beds remained mostly empty, they began to admit patients with mental health issues. Over time, it expanded further, adding a nursing home and, in 1990, a children's treatment unit for emotional and behavioral disorders. In 1991, the doctor I now work for purchased the hospital and converted it into a psychiatric facility, focusing on behavioral health and drug and alcohol detox programs. The original 1926 building, which had suffered extensive fire damage and disrepair, was eventually torn down and replaced with a parking lot. With such a layered history, it's easy to see why people would associate the place with hauntings. But here's the thing, our hospital didn't become a psych facility until the early 90s, so there's no history of the cruel experiments or mistreatment that some older psychiatric institutions are infamous for. If there are any spirits here, they most likely belong to the TB era. I've been with the company for about 6.5 years, though I worked in a different office before transferring to the hospital about a year ago. Before I came here, I had heard the rumors about the hospital being haunted. I'm not one to believe things just because I've been told, so I came into it with skepticism, always looking for logical explanations. That said, there are moments when things happen that simply can't be explained. Last August or September, I was working as a floor technician on the adult unit. Part of my job involved checking on the patients and filling out hall checks every 15 minutes to ensure everyone was where they should be, whether in their rooms, the lounge, or the game room. That day, most of our patients were in group therapy, so the unit was fairly quiet, with just a couple of people resting in their rooms. I was sitting in the hallway, taking a short break but still keeping an eye on everything. From where I sat, I could see into the lounge through a window and monitor who was in group therapy. I also had a clear view down the entire hallway, so I'd know if anyone left their room. While sitting there, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, a figure pacing back and forth at the far end of the hallway, near the fire door. I quickly glanced over but didn't see anything, so I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. But just as I turned back to my work, I saw it again in my peripheral vision. This time, I thought, what are they doing? I was concerned that someone might be messing with the fire door, which we always keep locked. If they managed to open it, it could trigger the fire alarm or allow someone to escape down the fire escape, causing a lot of chaos. It was close to the 15-minute mark when I got up to check on the floors again. As soon as I stood, the figure I had seen in the hallway earlier disappeared, but I wasn't ready to brush it off just yet. I decided to continue my rounds, knocking on the 2 doors where I knew patients were resting. Both were accounted for, either lying on their beds or relaxing, No sign of anything out of the ordinary. I walked over to the fire door and checked it. It was locked tight, just as it had been earlier that morning. I even double-checked the other rooms and bathrooms to make sure no one had slipped by unnoticed. Nothing. Confused, I just shrugged and went back to my post. Whatever I had seen, it didn't seem like one of the patients. If it was a ghost, well, it didn't feel dangerous. As long as it wasn't causing any harm, I figured I'd let it roam the halls if it needed to. This story, though, actually happened to one of my colleagues, Jenna, a nurse I work with. I can't recall the exact date, but it was a couple of years ago. At the time, Jenna was working on the 4th floor, which was our adult unit back then. That floor's since been repurposed, and now it's the residential floor for the kids. Some of the rooms have been unoccupied for a while, so for safety, they were kept locked. It's still a practice we follow today. Every shift change, we check to ensure all the doors are locked properly. On this particular day, one of the unoccupied rooms was being cleaned. The housekeeper walked in, but immediately backed out, visibly shaken, and went to find Gina. Curious, Gina went into the room to see what had spooked her. The moment she stepped inside, she felt uneasy. The furniture in the room was stacked in the middle of the floor, piled up neatly like a strange sculpture. In a normal room, there's usually a couple of beds and 1 or 2 tall TV stands with built-in drawers, like the kind you'd find in a hotel. These pieces are heavy, but they can be moved across the floor for cleaning. The stands, though they hold no TVs, are used to store patient belongings. But this furniture was all stacked on top of itself in a perfect pile right in the middle of the room. It was hard to figure out who could have done this, or why. Moving all that heavy furniture would have been nearly impossible for one person, let alone someone trying to do it quietly. From then on, Jenna started calling the room the poltergeist room. It took at least 2 of our maintenance guys to move everything back where it belonged. The second story happened about a year ago. One of our techs, Danny, was in the cafeteria with the kids during their lunch break. The cafeteria has 2 large windows that look out onto the backyard, which has a swing set, 2 basketball courts, and a volleyball court. On nice days, we take the kids outside so they can get some fresh air and stretch their legs. Danny stood up to look out the window while the kids were eating. At that moment, no one was out there, but he noticed one of the swings moving. It wasn't just swaying slightly. It was moving back and forth, as if someone was sitting on it. He jokingly said to the kids, "Looks like our ghost is back." The moment he said that, the swing stopped moving entirely. Later, Danny mentioned that the other swings weren't moving, and the trees weren't swaying, so it wasn't the wind. He tried to rationalize it, but couldn't come up with a logical explanation. We all keep an eye out for anything unusual around here, but we try to be level-headed and figure out what's really going on before jumping to conclusions. If we can't find a clear explanation, we just accept it as something unexplainable. As I've said before, we've all grown pretty used to the idea of sharing the space with something, or someone, that might not be of this world. This first experience happened to my mom when I was just a few months old. At the time, we lived in a small town in Louisiana. My parents were still young and struggling with the challenges life had thrown at them. They had a modest apartment, and my dad worked long night shifts, while my mom stayed home to take care of me. One night, while my dad was at work, my mom was lying in bed, trying to get some rest. She told me she suddenly felt a strange sensation, a feeling like someone was in the room with her. When she turned toward the bedroom doorway, she saw a tall, dark figure standing there. She never gave me many details about its appearance, but she said it began walking toward her. Terrified, she quickly rolled over to face the wall, hoping to block out whatever was there. But then, she felt this cold presence crawl into bed beside her. It wrapped its arms around her, like it was holding her down. Her heart pounded as fear gripped her, and all she could manage to say, through her tears, was, "Jesus, please help me." The moment those words left her lips, the figure vanished. Mom stayed awake the rest of the night, clutching the blankets tightly as she waited for my dad to come home. She told me about this experience when I was around 13 or 14, and it's something I've remembered ever since. Just yesterday, my grandmother shared a similar experience that she had when she was newly married. She and my grandfather had just started their life together when she began feeling an eerie presence in their bedroom. Every morning after my grandfather left for work, she said it was as if someone else stepped into the room. Though she never turned to look, she could feel the presence of a man standing beside the bed, hovering over her. This happened regularly, though I'm not sure for how long it lasted. Then my grandmother told me about her brother and his wife, who had a baby at the time, my second cousin, who was only a few months old. One night they both woke up feeling a heavy presence in their bedroom, but it seemed to be focused on the baby. My uncle quickly scooped up the baby and brought her into bed with them. But even after that, the feeling didn't go away. It was as though something was still lingering in the room. Both my uncle and his wife were terrified. They believed that there was more than one presence in the room. They prayed, asking for God's protection, but my uncle said it felt like the very act of praying was a struggle, as if they were fighting against an unseen force. After what felt like an eternity, the presence finally left, and they were able to feel safe once more. I've heard other stories from my sister, but I'll save those for another time. What strikes me as odd is how these experiences seem to happen only to people on my mom's side of the family. My mom, my grandmother, my great-uncle, and even my sister. It doesn't feel like coincidence, though I can't quite put my finger on what the connection might be. A while ago, I shared some strange experiences that my grandmother, her brother, and my mom had about 30 to 40 years ago. But today, I want to tell you about one of those memories and, more importantly, some unsettling experiences my sister had. When I was about 5 or 6, my family was in the process of building a house. At that time, we were still living in Louisiana, where my sister had been born. We moved back when she was about a year old, and for a few years, we were constantly on the move. First, we lived in an apartment that belonged to my great-grandmother, then rented a small house before buying land to build our forever home. But while the house was being built, we stayed with my grandparents, living in their basement for about a year. That was when the odd occurrences began. The house we moved into had a layout that immediately gave me a sense of unease. When you walked in, the front door opened into a large foyer. On one side was the living room, and on the other, the kitchen. Straight ahead, 2 sets of stairs beckoned, one leading upstairs, the other down to the basement. Down in the basement there was a narrow hallway, and at the far end, to the right, was a full bathroom. Across from it, a small bedroom where my sister and I stayed. My parents' bedroom was on the other side, a larger room with sliding glass doors that led to the backyard. My sister and I shared the smaller bedroom, and even though it was a quiet, unassuming space, I remember feeling something strange happen a few times during our stay. One morning, I woke up to find a group of people standing around my bed. They were dressed like they were headed to a fancy dinner, formal black tie attire. They spoke to each other, though I couldn't hear a word. The one person I could remember clearly was a woman in a red dress with dark hair. I wasn't scared at all, actually. I thought it was kind of cool. I mentioned it to my mom, but she wasn't too concerned since I wasn't frightened. It felt like a fleeting dream, and that was the end of it for me. But for my sister, things were a lot stranger. A few years later, when I was around 9 and she was 7, we moved again, this time to a rundown chicken farm we bought on the outskirts of a small town. The house had been neglected, and the elderly couple who sold it to us had their own struggles. The wife, in particular, had serious health issues and was a borderline hoarder. The house was filthy, cluttered, and filled with old items. When we first moved in, my sister and I were so terrified we couldn't even sleep in our own rooms. We spent our nights on a mattress in my parents' room before eventually retreating to a hideaway bed in the living room. There was just something off about the place. It was dirty and chaotic, and it didn't feel like home at all. Eventually, we grew used to the house and moved into our own rooms. Mine and Nell's rooms were across the hall from each other, and on the opposite side of the house from my parents' room. Late at night, we'd sometimes chat across the hall. One night, when Mel was about 8 or 9, she screamed for my parents. I woke up and rushed to her room. She was pale, her voice trembling as she described a man standing at the end of her bed. Tall, wearing a long robe, with a sword held upright in front of him, like he was standing guard. No one else could see him, but Mel was insistent. Strangely, she wasn't afraid. My parents told her it could be her guardian angel, which seemed to comfort her. She saw the man a few more times after that, though she rarely mentioned him again. A year or so later, Nell began hearing strange noises at night. She would hear people talking and whispering, though the words were always unintelligible. Sometimes the whispers would change to hissing sounds, and the conversations would always end with a loud, blood-curdling scream. This happened often, and when she told my mom, she was advised to pray when it occurred. After that, Nell stopped mentioning it, but I'm sure the whispers continued for a long while. We lived in that old farmhouse for about 12 years. Other strange things happened, things none of us could explain, but those are stories for another time. Personally, I never experienced anything as intense as Mel did. I never saw anything out of the ordinary, but I did hear the occasional strange noise, just faint enough to make me question whether it was real or just the house settling. When I was a teenager, my sister and I would often spend a week at our aunt's house during the summer. This particular time, we were visiting her place in a small town in Alabama, where she lived with her husband and 3 kids. I was probably around 14 or 15 at the time, old enough to help take care of my younger cousins, 2 of whom are on the autism spectrum. Our aunt trusted us to look after them for a few days while she and her husband had some time to themselves. Even though my aunt hasn't lived in that house for years, I can still picture it in my mind like it was yesterday. Most of the house was on the ground floor, except for a room upstairs with its own bathroom attached. The staircase leading to that room curved around, creating a small landing that overlooked the living room below. From the living room, you could see the door to that upstairs room, and from the landing, you could look straight down into the living room. At the bottom of the stairs, there was a baby gate to keep my younger cousins from wandering up. The upstairs room was mostly empty. My aunt told us they hadn't set it up yet since they just moved in. Still, she put an air mattress in the room for my sister and me, thinking it would be nice for us to have a little privacy in our own bathroom. It was a peaceful setup, and I was looking forward to the quiet. One night, I decided to go to bed early. The room had a window without curtains, so the moonlight came in and lit up the entire room. I was lying on the air mattress, facing the door, waiting for my sister to join me. As I stared at the door, a thought flickered through my mind, that the doorknob was going to move. It was a strange thought, almost like a premonition. And then it happened. The doorknob slowly began to twist. At first, I thought it might be my sister messing around, but then the knob started turning back and forth violently, like someone was desperately trying to get in. My heart raced and I sprang up, rushing to open the door, but when I swung it open, no one was there. I looked out over the landing. It was empty. From where I stood, I could see my sister downstairs in the living room, chatting with our aunt. I was confused, so I hurried downstairs, stepping over the baby gate, passing the room where my cousins were sleeping, and went straight into the living room. I asked my sister and aunt if anyone had been upstairs, but they both said no. My aunt even assured me that my sister had been with her the whole time. I trusted her. My aunt wouldn't lie, and it would have been impossible for anyone to sneak past me on the stairs without being seen, especially with the baby gate in place. When I told them what had happened, my aunt suggested that maybe the air conditioner had caused the doorknob to move. I didn't push it any further, not wanting to make anyone uncomfortable, but I wasn't convinced. No air conditioner could twist a doorknob like that, especially with the kind of force I had seen. The only explanation I could come up with was that their family cat had somehow gotten into the room. But even that didn't feel right. For one, I hadn't seen the cat at any point when I rushed downstairs, and it would have had to jump over the baby gate to get to the stairs. Cats are fast, so I can't completely rule it out. But if the cat had been so eager to get into the room, why didn't it run away when I opened the door? And even if the cat had been startled, I should have seen it retreating. Besides, the door swung inward into the room. For the knob to twist like it did, the cat would have had to press its weight on the door, which would have made the door open slightly. My aunt never mentioned that her cat had a habit of opening doors, but I've owned a cat that could do it before, so it's not entirely out of the question. I'm still not sure if what I experienced was supernatural, but it was definitely strange. Oddly enough, I wasn't scared during the event, nor when it was over, and not even when I went back upstairs. And I'm the kind of person who usually gets freaked out by stuff like that. The only thing I know for sure is that the handle moved. What caused it? I honestly can't say. It was 2 summers ago when I was about 13. I was visiting my friend Kay's house. Along with another friend, Jay. We were bored, with nothing to do, when Kay suddenly came up with an idea. For a while, Kay had been snapping pictures of strange orbs along her long driveway and in the woods behind her house. She was curious and wanted to investigate further. Naturally, I was all in. I'd always been fascinated by the paranormal. Jay, however, didn't believe in any of that stuff at the time. She decided to join us just to humor us. We gathered my laptop, a camera, and our phones before heading down the long, dusty driveway. Kay lived on a sprawling piece of land, surrounded by dense woods. We stopped about halfway down, far enough from the house so that her mom or grandmother wouldn't hear us. Kay's mom was very superstitious. She always said things like, "Watching movies about demons or possessions just invites them in." So we kept our little adventure to ourselves. We decided to try an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, session. Setting up my laptop's wireless webcam, we started recording. Not really knowing what we were doing, we asked the usual questions like, "Who are you?" and "Can you show yourself?" But when we played it back, there was nothing. Kay and I were still pretty excited, but Jay, who wasn't buying it, started getting bored. After some persuasion, she agreed to stay quiet for a second round. This time we asked more questions, though I can't remember all of them. I avoided asking anything about how the entity died. I'd read somewhere that asking about a spirit's death could invite negative energy. When we played the recording back this time, we heard something. There were faint whispers between our questions and the unmistakable sound of a gate slamming shut. But there was no gate nearby, and none of us had whispered. Kay and I were thrilled, but Jay, though still skeptical, seemed a little more intrigued. For the third EVP session, we decided to ask the spirit to make its presence louder. We even joked that maybe it was Kay's great-grandfather, who had passed away on the property. When we played the recording back, the whispers were indeed louder, just as we had asked. But still, the words were too faint to make out. By now, Jay had had enough and decided to help. Her idea of helping was to taunt whatever we had been contacting. "This is dumb. There's nothing here," she said loudly. Kay played along, trying to provoke a reaction, and I, out of curiosity, joined in. What could go wrong, right? When we played the recording back, we heard the same whispers, only a bit louder, but nothing that made sense. A mixture of disappointment and excitement settled in. We decided to take a break and play in the woods instead, leaving my laptop and camera on Kay's grandmother's porch. We kept our phones with us as we ran and laughed through the woods. She started chasing us with a spray bottle of water, and everything was fine until Kay suddenly stopped, her eyes wide with panic. "My phone's gone," she said, looking around frantically. It was a new phone, and her dad would be furious if she lost it. We retraced our steps, combing through the thick woods. As I was searching, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was Kay's dog, who had been missing for a week. But then I realized the dog wasn't with us. Slowly, I turned to look. In a clearing just a few feet away stood a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. It was about the size of a large dog, but its skin was leathery and dark brown. Its claws were long, resembling talons more than paws, and its face, it was stretched unnatural, with no eyes, just a wide, gaping mouth. The creature turned its head toward me, and then it opened its mouth. A low, guttural growl rumbled through the air, sending a chill straight down my spine. The sound was unlike anything I've ever heard. I was frozen, unable to move, until Jay's mom pulled up in her car. The creature vanished just like that. I didn't say a word as we made our way back to the driveway. I was still in shock, and Kay and Jay didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Jay's mom offered to take her home, but agreed to let her stay a bit longer to help us search for Kay's phone. Reluctantly, I followed them back into the woods, even though every part of me was screaming not to. As we searched, we all heard it. A second growl, louder this time. It wasn't just me. Everyone heard it. I quickly told them I'd seen something earlier, but I left out the details, not wanting to sound crazy. Jay, now visibly scared, stopped joking, and Kay seemed torn between fear and desperation to find her phone. I couldn't take it anymore. I told them I was going back to Kay's grandmother's porch. No one ever found the phone. Later, we half joked that whatever we had disturbed during the EVP session had taken it. But to this day, we rarely bring up what happened in those woods. I don't know what to call that thing I saw. Demon doesn't seem to fit. It's too much of a word people can dismiss. But the fear it radiated, it's the closest thing I can think of to describe it. When I was 17, I began to look back on the strange things that had happened to me when I was younger, things that made me believe in the supernatural. It all started when I was in 5th grade, a time in my life that still feels like a blur of darkness and isolation. That year was especially tough. From the moment I boarded the school bus on the first day, I was picked on. Every day was filled with taunts, whispers, and stares. At the time, I never thought these events were connected to the things that followed, but now, as I reflect on it, I wonder if my constant fear and sadness somehow opened the door to whatever was lurking. I was 12 when it all started. It began on an overcast afternoon, right after school. There was a patch of woods behind my house that I often retreated to when I needed to escape. It became my sanctuary, a quiet, secluded place where I could forget about the bullying, even if just for a little while. That day, as I walked through the trees, I saw her for the first time. She was young, maybe about my age. Her figure was gray, blending into the clouded sky, but somehow she stood out to me, like she was made of the very mist. She moved like she was dancing, spinning in a floral sundress. I couldn't look away. I felt an overwhelming urge to run toward her, but as I got closer, she vanished behind the trees. One moment she was there, and the next, nothing. She was gone. I never saw her face to face again, but I always knew she was still around. There was a smell that followed her, a sickening odor of rotting eggs. Each time I caught a whiff of it, something strange would happen. The first time, I didn't even notice it, but as I ventured back into those woods again and again, it became unmistakable. I remember once, a friend of mine took a turtle shell from the woods. Feeling uneasy, I went back to return it. That same awful smell filled the air as I approached, and as I walked along the path, I tripped over something invisible. Another time, I heard leaves rustling, but when I turned to look, no one was there. The experiences inside my house were just as unsettling. I'll never forget one of the first times something happened. I was playing video games in my room. When I finished, I set the controller down on the floor and sat on the bed, trying to calm my racing thoughts. After a while, I glanced down, and there it was, a hand. It was bright white, almost glowing, and it was reaching toward the controller. As soon as I saw it, the hand jerked back and disappeared faster than I could react. I bolted out of the room, too terrified to stay. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night, suddenly aware of something strange. I had always hated the dark, and had always made sure to close my closet doors before bed. But that night, I woke up to find them opening and closing on their own. There was a soft, eerie creaking, like someone was pushing and pulling them. On the floor of the closet, I saw something glowing. It was shaped like a skeleton, though I couldn't bring myself to get a closer look. I froze in place, unable to move, staring at it until it finally stopped. I hid under my blankets, too scared to even breathe, and eventually fell asleep out of sheer exhaustion. But the scariest experience happened one night when everything changed. I woke up to a strange yellowish light on the wall. Standing just a foot away from my bed was a tall, shadowy figure. I couldn't make out any facial features, but I could see its hair, and I could feel it staring at me. My heart pounded, and in a blind panic, I kicked out with my foot. My foot made contact with the figure, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was still lying in bed, staring at the spot where the shadow had been. A few years later, something happened outside the house that left me shaken. One night, I snuck out to meet my girlfriend, whom I'm still with today. I was riding my bike down the street when I heard a dog barking in the distance. The sound of it chasing me filled me with fear. I pedaled faster, glancing back, and saw a large black dog chasing after me. I could feel its presence closing in. Then just as I passed a car, I heard a soft thud. I thought the car had hit the dog, but the driver didn't stop. When I looked back, the dog was gone, vanished, as though it had never been there at all. None of these things have happened to me since. They didn't leave any lasting marks on my life, aside from the fear I felt at the time. But even now, I wonder if my sadness, if the bullying and the loneliness I felt, somehow made me more susceptible to the strange things I experienced. I'll never know for sure. This is my nightmare. My fiancé Ethan, his brother Jake, and their friend Michael are being tormented by something malicious, an evil spirit that's determined to hurt them. This has been going on for over a year and a half, and I'm at my wit's end. Please, I need your help. Hear me out. It all began one summer in a small town by a secluded creek. Ethan, Jake, and Michael would often hang out together, soaking up the warmth of the season. One night, on a whim, Jake and Michael decided to explore the woods nearby, and they stumbled upon an old, decaying farmhouse. It was abandoned, clearly forgotten by time. They broke in, and what followed was nothing short of chaos. They vandalized the place, smashed furniture, shattered windows, and wrecked the old electronics. Michael even went as far as, well, let's just say, he took things too far in one of the bedrooms. As if that wasn't bad enough, they made a crude Ouija board from scraps of wood and cardboard and decided to try it out. They didn't stop to think about what might be lurking in that house, something they couldn't see, something far darker than they realized. After a couple of weeks, the boys grew bored. They left the farmhouse behind, never expecting it to follow them. But it did. One day, Jake drove past the house, curiosity getting the better of him. He wanted to see if anyone had discovered the mess they had made. As he drove by, something caught his eye. A little girl standing by the house. Her skin was as pale as paper, and her eyes were black as coal. Just locking eyes with her sent a chill up Jake's spine. He quickly turned his truck around, the dread seeping into his bones. From that moment, his room was never the same. He started hearing strange noises at night, bumping, groaning sounds from the walls. Out of the corner of his eye, he'd see things moving, things that shouldn't have been. Items would shift on their own, and his electronics would malfunction. His phone, his computer, his TV, all flickering with static at odd hours. Terrified, Jake begged Ethan and Michael to return with him to the farmhouse. He wanted to see if that girl was still there. The three of them went back that night despite the uneasy feeling that hung in the air. The farmhouse was eerily quiet when they arrived, empty, as if no one had been there for years. Jake and Michael eagerly entered, but Ethan stayed behind, his unease growing. The younger two couldn't resist. They found a fire extinguisher in the garage and started playing with it. They grew bored quickly, leaving the extinguisher in the yard before they left. That night, as they hung out on Ethan's back porch-turned-bedroom, things took a turn. Ethan suddenly felt sharp pains in his back, and Michael complained about his stomach. They went to the bathroom to check. Ethan lifted his shirt, and to his horror, there were deep, bloody scratches across his back. Michael also lifted his shirt and found red handprints across his abdomen. None of them could explain it. That's when I got involved. I wanted to see the house for myself to understand what they were dealing with. So we went there. Around 8 p.m. I brought my camera along, hoping to capture something, anything that might shed light on what was going on. The house was dimly lit by a street light nearby, but when I took pictures, something strange happened. The house wasn't there in the photos. The images came out completely black, with odd, floating orbs where the house should have been. That was the moment we realized something truly dark was at play here. The next 5 months were eerily quiet, with only the occasional bump in the night. But one evening, while we were all talking in Jake's room, we heard a loud bang. We rushed to the living area to find a FedEx box had moved 15 feet across the floor, and all the doors in the house were wide open, the lights on. Terrified, we ran outside, taking refuge in the car until I had to leave. After that night, the activity only grew worse. One evening, Ethan and Jake tried recording voices, hoping to capture something they couldn't see. They lit a candle and began asking questions, holding the recorder. But when Ethan handed the recorder to Jake, something invisible slammed his head into the coffee table. Panicked, the two ran to Jake's room, where they heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps and sinister laughter echoing throughout the house. The next morning, they discovered that the doorknob to Jake's closet had been nearly torn off. But things took a stranger turn still. Jake recently saw something in the pantry. An old woman, translucent, with hollow eyes and a mouth wide open, but no sound came out. Meanwhile, I began receiving text messages from their deceased great-grandmother, Ruth. I never met Ruth, but I had seen her spirit in the house. The texts came at 3 a.m., sent from Ethan's phone, yet they didn't show up in his records. The messages were strange, cryptic, and frightening. Asterisk, Ruth guard gone soldier lonely pain. Asterisk, boys will suffer for lengths worn listen protect please. Asterisk, emotion stress weaken strengthen suicide. Terrified, I finally worked up the courage to respond. I asked, why me? How do I protect them? The reply was chilling, no, over and over again. When I asked once more, a final message appeared. You love him and family. I don't know what to do anymore. Whatever this is, it's evil, and it won't stop. We need help, but we have no idea where to turn. What is it that's haunting us? Why is it targeting them? And why is it speaking through Ruth? If any of you have experienced something like this, please share your thoughts. I can't do this alone. I had been living in the small town of Pine Ridge, Alabama, for about 5 years when I met Stephen. We clicked instantly, and within a few months, we decided it was time to move in together. Stephen suggested we live with his sister, Amber, who had just rented a small house in the countryside near the outskirts of town. It was about a 30-minute drive from Hoover, and at the time, it seemed like a practical choice. Amber had 2 young daughters, Sandy, who was 5, and Josie, who was 7, and her friend Catherine also lived with them. The house itself looked pretty typical for the area, tucked away near an old cemetery on the edge of a forgotten road. At first, the location didn't bother me much. I've always believed graveyards were peaceful places. However, that feeling soon changed. I had lived alone before and never had a problem with eerie surroundings, but this house, it felt different. I started to feel this constant weight of sadness and anxiety, something I couldn't shake off. It wasn't just me. Josie, my niece, started acting out too. She refused to be in the house by herself. One afternoon, while I was babysitting her, she insisted we stay out on the front porch until Amber came home. Mary, she said suddenly, staring out into the distance, do you believe in ghosts? I laughed, trying to keep things light. Not really. Why do you ask? Josie's eyes were wide with fear. The other night when I was in the shower, something black knocked me over and laughed at me, she explained. I tried to reassure her that maybe she had been dreaming or imagining things, but her insistence unsettled me. The nightmares started soon after. Josie began having vivid, disturbing dreams, bloody women sitting in bathtubs, and even more terrifying, a hanging figure with a rope tied around its neck. These were horrifying visions for a little girl who had never watched a scary movie. I, too, began experiencing strange dreams. In one, I was in the car with Stephen and his cousin Charles when I received a call from a man named Savior. "There is good, and there is evil," he said in a calm, eerie voice. "They're battling for your soul. Tell Stephen and Charles I love them." The scene around me flickered, and I was suddenly surrounded by candle flames. The voice of Savior repeated those chilling words over and over again. When I woke up and told Stephen about the dream, he looked at me in disbelief. Savior was a close friend of mine. He died a few years ago. He took his own life, Stephen revealed, and he's buried in the graveyard next to our house. I had never heard of Savior before. The atmosphere in the house only grew more oppressive. Stephen started waking up with the feeling of something pressing on his chest, while I often felt a strange sensation at the back of my head, as though someone was standing right behind me. Objects would move by themselves, and Josie would see dark shadows darting across the walls. It was unsettling. I wanted to leave, but we stayed, hoping things would get better. Then came the phone call from my dad. My grandmother had passed away after slipping into a diabetic coma. She had been a second mother to me, and her death was devastating. During the funeral arrangements, my dad suggested we move into my grandmother's house in Highville, Alabama, a small town further north. "Your grandmother always wanted you to have it," he said, "and you promised her you'd take care of it." Despite my growing unease, I agreed. A few days after the funeral, we moved into the house in Highville. If I thought things would improve, I was wrong. The house, while familiar, had a strange energy to it right from the start. On our third night there, Stephen and I were sitting in the living room, watching TV, when we heard heavy footsteps in the kitchen. It sounded like someone was walking between the kitchen and bathroom, but each time we got up to check, the sound would stop. I tried to make light of it. "Maybe it's Grandma," I joked. "She only ever stayed in these 3 rooms." But despite the joke, the unease lingered. Not long after, we noticed a white dog hanging around the property. It appeared out of nowhere, and every hour it would circle the house, staying at the foot of the driveway. When we tried to approach it, the dog would run off, but it never left. We started calling it Rufus, though its constant presence made us uneasy. It didn't stop there. I began hearing my name called, Mary, from the orchard, even when no one was around. One night, I was outside when I thought I heard it coming from my little Chihuahua pug Mix's mouth. Terrified, I ran inside, heart pounding. The bizarre events didn't end with voices. My phone began malfunctioning, dialing random numbers, and sending strange, cryptic messages. One morning, I found it covered in a sticky, sweet-smelling substance, though I couldn't explain how it got there. One night, as we sat outside on the porch, Stephen's voice suddenly changed. It grew deep and smooth, and he began saying things he couldn't have possibly known. Details about my family, including my grandfather's nagging cough and secrets about relatives Stephen had never met. When I asked, "Who are you?" his response sent chills down my spine. "I have 5 eyes," he said, his tone eerily calm. "One for every person in this house. I'm here to tear your family apart." At that moment, I heard screaming coming from inside. Amber and her boyfriend were having an argument, which was a rarity for them. I ran back inside, but when I turned to look, Stephen was back to normal, with no memory of what had just happened. The final straw came one afternoon when my niece Sandy ran to Stephen, eyes wide with terror. "There's a man in the orchard asking for Mary," she said, panic in her voice. Stephen checked, but found no one there. Later, I showed Sandy a family photo album. When she saw a picture of my Uncle Joey, who had died years ago, she froze and pointed at the photo. "That's the man I saw," she said. Sandy had never seen a picture of Joey before, yet she had described him perfectly. It was time to leave. The day after Sandy's encounter, my father passed away suddenly from a pulmonary embolism. That was the breaking point. After his funeral, we packed up and left the house in Highville. I couldn't stay there any longer. My brother now cares for the property, but the house has fallen into disrepair. The yard is overgrown, the floors are rotting, and the front door never stays closed, no matter how many times he tries to shut it. One day, he set up a tape recorder in the living room, and when he listened back, there was a deep, unsettling laugh captured on the tape. I haven't returned to that house, and I don't plan to. If it weren't for the other witnesses to what happened there, I might have thought I was losing my mind. My mother and I recently drove past the property, and she commented on how sad it was to see it in such a state. I just shrugged and said, that house could burn to the ground, and I'd be happy. What do you think happened in that house? Do you believe it was just grief and stress or something darker at work? Let me know your thoughts. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. I lived in a small town in Virginia for several years before eventually moving to Maryland. My wife and I bought a house there that we both loved, but I have no doubt in my mind that it was haunted. I won't share the exact address, but it was on a quiet street called Willow Ridge Lane. We bought the house in 2004 and lived there for 2 years. It was the perfect home for us and our 2 boys. The woman who sold us the house was elderly, and her daughter met us at the closing. Afterward, we all drove over to the house, where the elderly lady was saying her goodbyes to the neighbors. She was kind and mentioned how much she had loved the house, but she couldn't handle the stairs anymore. She seemed relieved that a family was moving in, and it made us feel good about our decision. During our conversation, she brought up her late husband, who had passed away in the house. It didn't faze me. People passing in their own homes is more common than we like to admit. She referred to him as a Fred, which was an odd phrase I'd only ever heard from older Southern women. At the time, I didn't think much of it. We moved in, unpacked, and made ourselves at home. The house had a great layout, including a sunroom at the back that had been converted into a garage, with a small storage room inside. I was excited to set up a workshop for my tools and projects. The previous owners had left a few things hanging on the walls, some of which were military related. Out of respect, I left them as they were. But not long after we moved in, something strange happened. One night I couldn't sleep and decided to organize the storage room. It was the middle of summer, and if you've ever been to Virginia, you know how scorching it can get. But for some reason, the storage room was freezing cold. It was out of place considering the heat outside, but I tried to ignore it. As I worked, I glanced over at the back door, which was open. The sunroom had access to the backyard, and its tinted glass made it difficult to see into the room from outside. Suddenly, a tall, older man walked past the door and disappeared behind the glass. My heart stopped. My first thought was, someone's in my house. He was tall, and he shouldn't have been there. I grabbed a baseball bat and ran toward the door to confront him. But by the time I got to the sunroom, there was no one there. I checked all the doors and windows, and they were all locked. I searched the entire downstairs but found nothing. Panicking, I rushed upstairs to check on my boys. They were both sound asleep, and no one else was up there. Confused and still on edge, I went back downstairs, locked the back door, and stepped outside to see if anyone was in the yard. There was no sign of anyone. That's when it hit me, Fred, the man the previous owner had mentioned. My initial fear turned into unease as I realized what I had likely seen. I went back inside and went to bed, still shaken. The next morning, I told my wife. At first, she was unsettled, but after talking it through, we both agreed that it must have been Fred. We came to the conclusion that Fred wasn't trying to scare us. Maybe he was just checking on us, making sure we were all right, or perhaps giving us his approval. After that, we never saw him again, but the house always had an odd feeling to it, like you weren't entirely alone. It wasn't oppressive or menacing, just a quiet presence lingering in the background. Strangely enough, the storage room eventually returned to normal. The cold temperature disappeared, and it felt like just any other room in the house. Maybe Fred had finished whatever task had kept him there, his honey-do list, as I jokingly called it. Though we've since moved on, that house still sticks with me. I never felt threatened by Fred, but I'll never forget the night I saw him walking through the house. It felt like he was gently reminding us that while we owned the house, it still had a history, and he was a part of it. Underscore 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 underscore. This is a continuation of the story following the events that happened while my family and I lived in Virginia on Willow Ridge Lane. After sharing my first story about Fred, the ghost we believed to be the spirit of the previous owner's husband, my wife and I discussed more of the strange occurrences in that house. We recalled additional details that we feel are worth mentioning. Fred, as I said before, was the spirit I encountered early on, but after that first sighting, we never saw him again. The cold spot in the workshop/storage room lingered for quite a while, but eventually disappeared, as if Fred had moved on. While Fred seemed to be at peace, there was something else that definitely wasn't. Our home was a 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood outside Pine Lake, a small town in the Midwest. It was a cozy, charming place with a master bedroom downstairs and 2 bedrooms upstairs. The layout was open and welcoming, with a balcony at the top of the stairs that overlooked the living room below. You could see right into the upstairs bedrooms from the living room, and the staircase ran along the right side of the front door. My wife, Rachel, loved the open design and spent hours making the place feel warm and inviting. We usually parked in the back, entering through the garage, which led into the sunroom and then into the kitchen. From the back door, you could see straight through the house to the front door. I remember clearly when things started to feel off. It began with strange movements out of the corner of my eye, something at the stairs. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but it kept happening. Eventually, I made it a habit to look at the stairs when I came home alone. What I saw was hard to deny: a faint, shadowy figure, the outline of a head peeking over the railing at the top of the stairs, as though someone was watching me. The moment I noticed it, the figure would vanish, darting up the stairs before I could get a better look. It wasn't always at night. Sometimes it happened during the day too. At first, I thought it was just the sunlight coming through the bay window in the living room or the small window in the front door. We put up curtains to block the light, but it didn't stop the figure from appearing. I kept it to myself, not wanting to freak out Rachel or the boys. About 6 months later, Rachel and I were having lunch one Saturday when she asked me, "Have you seen anything weird in the house since that first time?" I paused, then admitted that I had. I asked what she meant, and she told me she'd been seeing someone on the stairs whenever she came in the back door. Before she could finish, I interrupted, "And then they shoot up the stairs really fast, right?" Her eyes went wide. We both realized we'd been seeing the same thing. It unsettled us, but neither of us felt threatened. It felt more curious than anything, like the spirit was just watching us, not intending harm. We started thinking it might be a different presence than the one we had sensed before, something more active, almost like it was trying to communicate. We decided to turn one of the upstairs bedrooms into a family room, so the boys could play video games, watch TV, and spend time together. They shared the other bedroom as their sleeping space. But the family room, it had a strange energy. When you were alone in there, it felt like someone was standing behind you watching. The air felt heavier, like it shifted when someone walked in, no matter how much we tried to recreate that feeling. Whether we opened the windows, turned on the air conditioner, or even left the doors open, it never felt the same. The atmosphere there was unlike any other room in the house. The most unsettling thing happened one night when I was working late at the office. Rachel and the boys were upstairs in the family room when they heard a loud slam from the upstairs bathroom. One of the cabinet doors had slammed shut, as if someone had slammed it in anger. The sound startled all of them, and shortly after, my older son, Matt, had his own strange experience. He tried to open the door to his bedroom from the inside, but it wouldn't budge. He said it felt like someone was holding it shut from the other side. After struggling for a moment, the door suddenly swung open by itself, and Matt rushed downstairs, terrified. Even with all these strange occurrences, none of us ever felt that the presence in the house was dangerous. Unsettling, yes, but there was no sense of malice. It was more like the house was, alive in some way, with a history that was still present in its walls. We couldn't deny that someone was there, but it didn't feel like a threat. It felt more like a lingering curiosity, as though the spirit wanted to observe us, not harm us. Looking back, those experiences are still hard to explain. Fred, the first spirit we encountered, had come and gone quickly, but the presence on the stairs felt more like a piece of the house's past, a memory that hadn't quite moved on. Eventually, we moved out of that house, but the strange events have stayed with us. We never found out who or what it was that watched us from the stairs. What do you think was really going on in that house? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. It was 11:00 p.m., and I was alone in my house. As a grown man with plenty of supernatural experiences under my belt, I wasn't easily shaken. But what happened that night, and everything surrounding it, left me feeling unsettled for much longer than I expected. Weird things have always been a part of my life. Stuff disappears only to reappear later. Lights flicker no matter where I am, and I've encountered more than my fair share of bizarre, unexplainable happenings. When I moved into this place, I knew the previous owner had passed away here after a long battle with cancer. The neighbors said she used to love gardening, but as her illness took over, the weeds began taking over the yard. Before moving in, I did everything I could to protect myself. I staged the house, laid salt across the windowsills and doors, and spoke out loud, almost as if to herself, that I was the new owner and promised to care for the house. I worked hard to make the place my own, painting the walls, replacing the old carpets, remodeling the bathrooms, and even building a hearth for the fireplace. I wanted the previous owner's spirit to know I had good intentions. Still, the strange things kept happening. There were noises in the attic, soft footsteps across the rafters, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Certain spots in the house felt icy cold, especially in my bedroom, and every now and then, a rotten smell would fill the air. At night, I'd lie in bed, the mattress shifting beneath me as if someone were slowly creeping toward me. Even worse, I had recurring nightmares that tormented me night after night. A whole other story in itself. But the worst of it came one night while I was sitting on the couch. My DVD rack, loaded with movies and heavy enough to weigh about 20 pounds, suddenly tipped over. It was a tall rack, about 4 feet high and 2 feet wide, so it would have required some serious force to knock it over. The crash was deafening. As I stared at the mess on the floor, one thought consumed me. Why? Who did this? Something unseen had shown its power, reminding me that I wasn't truly alone here, and that I couldn't stop it. At that time, I was living a life I wasn't proud of. Too many mistakes in my past. I felt unworthy to call on God for help. So I decided to make a change. I married my girlfriend, now my wife, to put an end to our reckless lifestyle, and I got baptized, hoping it would cleanse me of my past. Only then did I feel like my prayers might actually be heard. I reached out to a psychic to help cleanse the house. She came by, walking through every room, checking every corner before asking for a ladder to reach the attic. When she came back down, she looked uneasy. She told me that something dark had attached to me since childhood, feeding on my misery and depression, bringing a shadow of evil into my life. But she assured me it was gone now, though she warned me this might be just the beginning. I paid her $200 for her services, but her words lingered. Still uneasy, I decided to get a second opinion. This time, I saw a man who didn't charge me anything. He asked about my life, my past, and my personality. After a while, he told me something chilling. My spiritual aura was darker than anything he had ever encountered. Without knowing anything about my history, he saw right through me. He said he cleared both my home and my aura of that darkness. For a while, things seemed to calm down. But then, strange events started happening at work. One day, a nitrogen bottle, one of those heavy 30 to 40-pound cylinders, just tipped over on its own, rolling across the welding table. No one was near it, and yet it started moving toward the edge. If it had fallen and the valve had broken, it could have turned into a deadly missile. I managed to catch it just in time, but the experience rattled me. How could something that heavy fall like that on a perfectly level table? It reminded me of my old house, the one I'd left behind. It, too, had been plagued with paranormal events. My old roommate once asked if my girlfriend, now wife, had been involved with anything occult. He said strange things had started happening after she moved in. Whistles when no one was in the shower, the dogs growling at nothing, lights flickering, the TV turning off by itself. I brushed it off, insisting that my wife was kind and loving, but the events were hard to ignore. Once I woke up to find a bat in my room. Another time, I saw a heavy toolbox lift off the ground and slam back down with a force that echoed through the house. There was no explanation. The most terrifying incident involved the side door. My roommate and I came home one day to find one of the dogs outside, running loose. But the side door wasn't just ajar. It had been blown off its hinges, the door jamb and all, lying in the yard. The force it would have taken to do that was unimaginable. Inside, I found 2 dog kennels open. My dog, who usually hated strangers, was cowering inside, terrified of a massive pit bull that had been let loose. It was like something wanted to stir up violence among the dogs. Looking back, I can't deny that I've invited darkness into my life. Growing up with abuse and hate in my heart, I sought revenge, communicating telepathically with what I thought was a friendly spirit. It wasn't until later that I realized its true nature. When I was 15, it attacked me in my sleep, demanding I fulfill the deal we made. I tried to deny it, challenging it to show itself, and it did. A classmate, shaking and terrified, claimed demons had contacted her, and she begged me to help. I couldn't believe it, but I knew then that the evil I'd called into my life was real. Over the years, I've faced nightmares, sleep paralysis, and tormenting experiences that won't go away. Whether these forces were drawn to the darkness in my past, or if something else is going on, I can't say for sure. What I do know is that these encounters have defined my life, and my attempts to escape them are ongoing. Years ago, I had a friend named Mike. We were inseparable, always hanging out after school and on weekends. We spent hours playing video games, collecting trading cards, or running around in the woods behind his house, imagining we were adventurers. Mike's parents had divorced when we were younger, and his mom, Susan, worked multiple jobs to support them. One of her gigs involved house-sitting for a family from our church who traveled frequently. They lived in a massive old house in a prestigious neighborhood on the outskirts of our small town. The house was breathtaking. A dark brick Victorian with large arched windows and a steep roof that seemed to touch the sky. A long gravel driveway led to it, lined by towering pines that blocked out most of the sunlight. It had been built in the 1800s and was well kept, but it still felt haunted, like something from another time. Inside, the floors were polished hardwood, creaky in places, and there were 3 stories in total. The 3rd floor was an attic, a space that had been converted into a small apartment for the elderly mother of the homeowners. She had passed away just a few months before we started visiting, and shortly after, her family began making renovations on the upper floor. The floors were ripped out, and the furniture was moved out too. This detail is important, so remember it. Mike and I loved hanging out in the house's library, a grand room with tall, arched ceilings and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. On one side of the room was a TV, and we spent hours there playing on his old Xbox. But as much as I enjoyed the time with Mike, there was something off about that room. The walls were covered in old paintings, many of which had been in the house for generations. They were hung at odd angles, some even high above the level of the doorways. It gave the room an unsettling feel, like the eyes of the people in the portraits were following you no matter where you stood. Even when the room was dim, lit only by the flickering TV screen, it felt as though we were being watched. It wasn't just the paintings. The room would get uncomfortably cold at times, with sudden, intense cold spots that seemed to move through the room. It wasn't like the air conditioning turning on. It was more like an icy hand brushing past you. Every time it happened, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Sometimes we hear heavy footsteps, slow, deliberate steps, coming from somewhere deep in the house, but no one would be there when we looked. At first, we thought it was Susan moving around, but those footsteps didn't match her light, quick steps. The house also had a maze of narrow hallways used for servants to move unseen in the past. Now they were mostly used for storage, but we'd often hear crashes, like boxes falling, coming from behind the walls. Mike's mom would brush it off, saying it was just the wind or things shifting in storage. But I could always see the flicker of unease in her eyes when she said it. One night, after hours of gaming, Mike and I decided we were too old to sleep in his mom's room, as we usually did. Instead, we stayed in one of the upstairs bedrooms. It was a cozy room with 2 twin beds and a small couch by the window. The layout of the second floor was unusual. Rooms formed a circle around the central staircase, which zigzagged its way up through the middle of the house. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a faint thud. I couldn't tell what it was, but it was so subtle that I thought it might have been part of my dream. But then I heard it again, 3 heavy, deliberate thumps. Boom, boom, boom. My heart skipped a beat. I recognized the sound. It was unmistakable. Someone walking in heavy boots on a wooden floor. But no one was supposed to be upstairs. The staircase to the 3rd floor had been sealed off, and the renovation work had exposed only beams up there, no floorboards. It was physically impossible for anyone to be walking around. I sat up in bed, the cold sweat already beading on my forehead. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I'd heard, but there was no logical explanation for it. My pulse quickened as I realized it. Whatever was making those footsteps wasn't bound by the laws of physics. It wasn't supposed to be there. I stayed frozen, my mind buzzing with a mix of dread and confusion, until I finally gathered the courage to leave the bed and sprint to the bathroom. The floorboards felt like ice under my feet, and the coldness in the air was chilling. As I passed by Mike's mom's room, I peeked inside and saw that she was still sound asleep. I made my way to the bathroom, but as soon as I sat down, the breeze hit me, cold and sharp, almost unnatural. That's when I heard it again, 3 heavy footsteps, boom, 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 coming from above. My blood ran cold. There was no way it could be anyone walking up there. I could feel the room closing in on me, my mind spinning with fear. It was impossible for anyone to be up there. Yet there they were, walking in boots that echoed through the house. I hurriedly finished up and rushed back to the bedroom, nearly stumbling in my haste. I checked on Mike's mom again, and she was still asleep, completely unaware of what I had just experienced. Once back in the room, I tried to tell Mike what happened, but he was still half asleep and didn't seem to care. In a panic, I pushed the small couch in front of the door, trying to block it, though I knew it wouldn't do much. I climbed back into bed, pulled the covers up, and waited for sleep to take me, but it never did. To this day, I can't shake the sound of those boots on the floor that wasn't there, and the room directly above the bathroom. That's where the homeowner's mother had passed away earlier that year. The connection never left my mind, and every time I think back to that night, I can't help but wonder if she was still there, walking the house in the dead of night, making sure someone was listening. My name is Michael, and my faith in God has always been the foundation of my life. I've been fascinated by the paranormal ever since I was a kid, but I've never just accepted strange occurrences at face value. I believe in seeking the truth, whether it's through critical thinking or learning from the experiences of others. Some might dismiss these encounters as just the imagination running wild, but I approach them with an open mind, always searching for answers. My relationship with God is at the core of everything I do. I don't just follow religion because I'm told to, I strive to live according to the teachings of the Bible, much like the Berean Jews in Acts 17:10-11. I carefully examine what I'm told to make sure it aligns with the truth. I believe that the spiritual and the supernatural are connected, which is why I feel it's important to share my experiences while also explaining the role my faith plays in them. Growing up, I was incredibly close to my grandfather. He was a man of great kindness, someone who showed me love in ways I still cherish. I have so many fond memories of us watching old reruns of The Price is Right together at 11 a.m. every day. As I grew older, I saw him as not only a grandfather, but as a steady, calming presence. In his later years, he became more deeply religious, a change I saw as natural for many people as they approached the end of their lives. But as much as I adored him, my grandfather wasn't always the man I knew. There were stories from my relatives about his fiery temper when he was younger, how he wasn't always the affectionate, patient father that he had become as a grandfather. Even he would admit to those flaws, reflecting on how his anger had impacted his relationships. As a young child, I had a hard time reconciling this with the kind, loving figure I had always known. That temper, unfortunately, seemed to pass down to my father. My dad is, in many ways, a wonderful man, loving, caring, and supportive. But like my grandfather, he had his moments. Occasionally, his anger would flare up, and in those times, he would lash out in ways that left scars. Though the anger was never physical, it was enough to leave me feeling hurt. But underneath that, I always knew my dad had a good heart, even if his emotional walls made it hard to see. One particular memory stands out from my childhood. My grandfather had been staying with us after surgery, and one day, my dad got upset with me over something minor. His anger erupted in a way that created tension in the house and left me in tears. Afterward, my grandfather pulled me aside, and with sadness in his eyes, told me, "Son, I take responsibility for that. Your father learned his anger from me. I'm sorry." It was a rare moment of vulnerability from a man who had lived through much, a moment I've carried with me ever since. In 2003, my grandfather passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. It was a devastating loss, especially for my father. I was only 12, and while I grieved, my sorrow gradually faded with time. I thought of him often, but life moved on, until something happened when I was 17 that I'll never forget. One night, I had a dream that felt more like an experience than just sleep. In the dream, I was standing outside in the parking lot of a large shopping center with my dad and my best friend, Johnny. Snow had piled up deep on the ground, the kind of heavy, wet snow that makes everything feel silent. Johnny and I were running ahead, laughing as we tried to outpace my dad. As we entered the store, a massive pile of snow fell from the top of the sliding doors, hitting an older woman behind us in a way that seemed straight out of a comedy sketch. My dad was furious and scolded me harshly, his voice echoing through the store. I was embarrassed, but I brushed it off and ran to the back with Johnny. We found a small picnic table meant for kids, and even though we were well beyond the age for it, we sat down and started playing with Legos we pulled from the shelves. Johnny sat diagonal to me, leaving the spot across from me empty. But then something strange happened. I noticed someone sitting across from me. The store had grown eerily quiet, and Johnny was nowhere to be seen. Slowly, I lifted my gaze. There, sitting in front of me, was my grandfather. His clothes were worn. He wore a brown blazer and a beige shirt that looked old and disheveled. His face was unmistakable, yet horrifying. His jaw hung loosely to one side, and where his eyes should have been, there were only empty sockets, with blood trickling down his cheeks. A deep wave of sadness hit me as I sat frozen, and then, in my grandfather's clear, distinct voice, he said, "I am sorry." I knew exactly what he meant. He was apologizing for my father's earlier outburst, acknowledging his own role in shaping that temper. As soon as he spoke those words, I woke up, shivering in my bed. The night was hot, but I felt ice cold, tears streaming down my face. I was still crying when I woke up in the middle of that summer night. This dream was unlike any I had ever experienced. It felt more like an encounter, something beyond the realm of imagination. I'm not the kind of person who is quick to attribute paranormal events to every strange occurrence, but this was different. I felt, deep in my soul, that my grandfather was reaching out to me in a way I couldn't fully understand. Maybe one day, when I meet God, I'll have the answers. But until then, I know what I experienced that night was real. It's a memory that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life, no matter how others may try to dismiss it. I've lived in the quiet town of Pine Lake, Montana, my entire life, while most of my family resides in California. Last night, I learned that a cousin I hardly knew had passed away. The news stirred up a lot of emotions and made me reflect on something strange I've felt for as long as I can remember, this eerie sensation of being watched, as though I'm never truly alone. These feelings have followed me since childhood, growing stronger over the years. There was a time when I thought maybe I was losing my mind, so I went to a therapist. I went through several tests, but everything came back normal. Medically and mentally, I'm a healthy 21-year-old woman, yet there's something I can't shake. I've always been open to the possibility of the paranormal. After all, just because something can't be proven doesn't mean it's not real. I also seem to sense things about people that they don't share, as if I can pick up on what they're feeling deep down. And then there's the presence I've felt since I was a little girl, the one I call my special friend. He doesn't feel like family. It feels like a man, and while he's saved me a couple of times, I don't think he's entirely good. He plays tricks on me at night, like turning my computer on and off, and there are times when his presence feels dark, almost evil. The first time I encountered someone who had passed away was when I was about 9 or 10. My Uncle Johnny, my dad's twin brother, passed away when he was just 18, long before I was born. One night, I woke up to find the blankets I'd hung around my bunk bed for comfort were missing. A man stood by my window, looking out. He looked just like my dad, only not quite. I called out, "Dad," but he didn't respond. He just stood there, staring into the night, as if he didn't expect to be noticed. A strange feeling urged me to leave, so I ran to my parents' room. My dad was asleep. When I looked back into my room, the man was still there. Then the name Johnny popped into my head. I said it aloud, and the man turned to me smiling. It was a kind, warm smile that made me feel safer than I'd ever felt. Then he disappeared. When my great-grandmother passed away, I woke up at 3:36 a.m. to a loud bang. Her image appeared in my mind, smiling, and then it was gone. The next day, I found out she had fallen from her bed during the night, hitting her head, and passed away due to complications from a stroke. The hardest loss for me was my Uncle Paul. He was like a second father to me, and we were incredibly close. When he became seriously ill and started suffering from repeated heart attacks, I felt a deep dread. On the morning of his death in 2009, I woke up at 4:46 a.m. with a panic attack, sobbing, begging God not to take him. I eventually fell asleep and had a vivid dream. In the dream, I was standing in Uncle Paul's backyard in California, surrounded by his beloved garden. He told me how much he loved me, reassured me that everything would be okay, and said he would miss his family and his yard. Then he hugged me and was gone. I woke up to learn that his final heart attack had begun at 4:44 a.m., and he passed at 4:48 a.m., exactly as I had dreamed. I haven't seen him since that night, but that dream gave me a sense of comfort that words can't explain. But my special friend isn't like any of these family members. He's been with me since I was young, and though I've grown used to him, there are nights when his presence feels overwhelmingly intense. I've asked him his name many times, but every time I do, I'm hit with a wave of anger, something darker, and I can't speak. I talked to my aunt about it, and she told me that our family has a history of seeing spirits, yet no one else has mentioned a presence like this. It makes me feel even more isolated. Two years ago, I was living in a small apartment in the heart of Pine Lake, a quiet town in the Midwest, with my mother and young daughter. Pine Lake had its share of strange stories, particularly around the old section of town. which locals referred to as the Hollow. This area was infamous for its eerie happenings, and our little corner of Pine Lake seemed to draw its fair share of odd occurrences. My daughter, only 4 at the time, often acted like she could see things I couldn't. One afternoon, we were having lunch at a local diner called Joe's Place, a cozy spot near the lake, when my daughter started waving enthusiastically out the window. I glanced over, expecting to see a friend or a neighbor, but there was no one there. She kept smiling and waving as if she were greeting someone I couldn't see. It wasn't the first time things like this had happened, and it left me with an unsettling feeling that something was not quite right. At 26, I was hardly getting old or forgetful. I've always prided myself on being organized and sharp, with a good memory for where I placed things. Take my hairbrush, for example. Its home was always on the bathroom counter. Every now and then, I'd move it to my bedroom to do my daughter's hair, but it always found its way back to its original spot, or at least it used to. There were moments when I'd go to grab it, only to find it missing. I'd search my room, but it wasn't there either. But when I returned to the bathroom, there it was again, sometimes in a different spot, as though it had been moved while I wasn't looking. The presence in our apartment wasn't shy. It made itself known, especially when I was alone or when all 3 of us were gathered together in one room. If I was in my bedroom, I'd often hear sounds coming from the kitchen, like someone rummaging through the cabinets. I'd hurry in, thinking my mom or daughter had returned, but no one would be there. At other times, when we were all together in the living room, we'd hear strange noises coming from the bathroom or bedroom, like something had fallen. But when I checked, everything was exactly where we left it, undisturbed. The most memorable incident happened one morning when we were preparing to leave for a trip. My mom and daughter were already outside, waiting by the car, and I stayed behind to grab something from the kitchen. As I stood there, I heard the front door open and close, so I assumed my mom had come back inside. Our apartment had a small open layout with a kitchen island that allowed you to walk in a loop from the kitchen to the living room, down the hallway, and back to the front door. I moved toward the hallway, expecting to find my mom, but I heard footsteps heading in the opposite direction. Confused, I turned back, thinking we'd cross paths, but the footsteps changed direction too. That's when it hit me. My mom wouldn't be running around in circles to avoid me. I stopped dead in my tracks and peered out the window toward the car. Sure enough, there she was, sitting in the passenger seat, completely unaware of what had just happened inside. I was shaken, my heart racing as I bolted out the door and joined her in the car. Breathless, I explained my ghost chase, trying to make sense of it all. That moment stands out as one of the clearest signs that we weren't alone in that apartment. Whatever it was, or whoever, it wanted to be noticed, and it wasn't going to let us forget it. In April 2002, my husband re-enlisted for a new assignment at Fort Wainwright, Alaska. By September, we had left our familiar home at Fort Benning and embarked on a new chapter in one of the coldest and most isolated places in the world. After 3 weeks of temporary lodging, we settled into a townhouse in the Birchwood area. It was cozy, and at first, everything seemed peaceful. But over time, unsettling events began to unfold, lingering until we finally moved out in April 2006. The first strange incident occurred one night when my husband was working a late shift. I was deep asleep when I suddenly jolted awake, feeling 2 distinct pokes on my left thigh. Thinking it was my young daughter wanting to climb into bed, I rolled over, but there was no one there. I checked on the kids, finding both of them sound asleep in their rooms. I convinced myself it must have been a strange dream and went back to sleep. Months later, my husband was home, and I was lying on my left side, fast asleep. Suddenly, I awoke to someone forcefully whispering, "What?" directly into my right ear, accompanied by warm breath. Assuming it was my husband playing a prank, I kicked him awake and scolded him. He groggily denied any involvement, and after a brief argument, I reluctantly went back to sleep. He half-jokingly suggested it might have been one of my friends, referring to the unexplained occurrences that seemed to follow me. One evening, after we had tucked the kids in, My husband and I were downstairs watching TV when we heard the unmistakable sound of small footsteps descending the staircase. Thinking it was our daughter sneaking around, my husband rushed to the bottom of the stairs, but when he looked, no one was there. Bewildered, we both went upstairs to check on the kids, finding them peacefully asleep. Now fully convinced something strange was at play, my husband looked at me and I said simply, "I told you so." Smaller incidents soon became routine. Items would vanish only to reappear days later. TVs upstairs and downstairs would turn off on their own, and the dryer door would occasionally pop open by itself. One time, the garage door locked itself while I was outside throwing away trash. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, and I developed a firm rule. I would never go downstairs alone at night after we had gone to bed. My husband would tease me about it, but I couldn't shake the constant unease that gripped me. The most unsettling event happened a month before we moved out. My husband was working another night shift, and it was a bitterly cold, snowstorm-filled evening. After a long day indoors with the kids, I told them to come upstairs with me while I took a shower. I made sure all the doors and windows were locked before we went upstairs. Something about that night made me uneasy, and I didn't want the kids out of my sight. After my shower, I dressed and asked the kids if they wanted a snack. As we descended the stairs, I froze. Our dog was lying in front of the wide-open front door, staring intently at something outside, tense and ready to pounce. My heart pounded. I knew I had locked both the front and screen doors, and the kids had been with me the entire time. There was no explanation for how both doors had opened. Panic set in. I grabbed the kids, tossed their coats at them, and hurriedly told them to grab the dog and get in the car. Once we were safely outside, I locked the doors, jumped into the car, and sped away. I called my husband, telling him everything that had happened and urging him to come home immediately to check the house. He contacted the military police, and they met me at the entrance of our neighborhood, speeding toward the house with lights flashing. I stayed in the car with the kids while the MPs searched the house thoroughly, checking every room, closet, and crawl space. They found no one and no signs of forced entry. Despite their reassurances, the terror I felt wouldn't go away. That night, the kids and our dog slept in my room. I locked the bedroom door, grabbed a baseball bat, and tried to convince myself that we were safe. But deep down, I knew whatever was in the house wasn't something I could fend off with a bat. When we finally left the house a month later, I felt nothing but a sense of relief. I can only hope the next family to move in hasn't experienced the same terrifying phenomena we did. In the summer of 2008, after a difficult separation from my ex-husband, I found myself in a small one-bedroom apartment on Cedar Lane in Ashford, Oregon. The transition was tough, and the silence of the new space weighed heavily on me. It was my first time living alone, and the apartment was small, with just a few basic pieces of furniture. The complex didn't allow pets, so there were no animals to keep me company. I initially thought the eerie quietness was simply the result of my loneliness and the changes I was going through. But it didn't take long for me to realize something wasn't quite right. Just a few hours after settling in, I began to notice odd movements in the apartment. It was subtle at first, a faint rustling sound, like the flick of a cat's tail or the soft scratching of claws against the carpet. I was certain there was no pet in the apartment, yet the noises persisted. I figured I was just imagining things, an overactive mind playing tricks on me in a new environment. But that first night, things took a darker turn. It was around 10:30 p.m., and I was preparing to get into bed when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of my refrigerator door opening and closing. It wasn't just a small creak or shift. I could clearly hear the rubber seal of the door distorting with each movement, followed by the faint rattle of food shifting inside. Living in a small town in Oregon, I was always cautious about security, so I locked the doors and windows as a habit. There was no way anyone could have snuck in unnoticed, yet the sound was so real, so clear, that I could almost feel someone rummaging through my fridge. With a chill creeping down my spine, I grabbed my handgun and carefully checked every room, the closets, and under the bed. Nothing. The apartment was empty, but to my horror, the refrigerator door remained tightly shut. After standing in the kitchen for another half hour, I finally went back to bed, trying to shake off the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I told myself I was just exhausted, that maybe it was just a figment of my imagination. The second night, the fridge noise returned, this time accompanied by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were slow at first, moving through the living room and then down the narrow hallway toward my bedroom. They stopped just outside my bedroom door, a few steps away, yet I was still completely alone. No one had entered. I felt as if something was watching me, waiting. Over the next few weeks, the strange occurrences grew more frequent. Doors I had closed securely would be found wide open. The closet door to the water heater in my bedroom, always a struggle to open, would swing wide in the middle of the night. My sliding closet doors, which required a lot of effort to move, would somehow be wide open in the morning, or after I returned from work, as though someone had been rifling through my things. But the most unsettling incidents involved my keys. I always kept them in a basket on the small entry table, and yet they would vanish without explanation. The next morning, I would frantically search every corner of the apartment, and just when I thought I was going crazy, I would find them hanging from the hook above the basket, somewhere I had never placed them. It soon became clear that whatever was in my apartment wasn't trying to harm me. If anything, it seemed more like a mischievous presence, seeking attention rather than causing harm. It was as though it simply wanted to be acknowledged. The disturbances began to feel less threatening and more like a strange game. One day, I finally spoke aloud. "Please, can you give me back my keys? I really need them, and this isn't funny anymore." Oddly enough, after I said those words, the activity would stop for a while. Almost like a child, it seemed content knowing it had been noticed. While the incidents never turned violent or malicious, they were unnerving. But in a strange way, I began to feel like I wasn't entirely alone in that apartment. There was something, or someone, there, lingering, wanting attention but not with any real malice. It was an uneasy coexistence, but over time, I made peace with the presence. I came to understand that for as long as I lived there, I was sharing my space with something that didn't want to be forgotten. There are moments in life when something feels off, a sensation deep in your gut, as if you're bracing for impact. It's not exactly a premonition, but a kind of visceral warning. I've felt it before, at critical moments in my life. One of the clearest times was just before an unsettling experience with a Ouija board. The most recent one, though, came during my sister-in-law's difficult labor, when we nearly lost her and the twins. These feelings have always been a signal that something significant, or unpleasant, is about to happen. Growing up, my parents brushed these feelings off as anxiety, or maybe even acid reflux. They took me to doctors, ran tests, and when nothing came up, they chalked it up to an overactive imagination. But I know my body. I've learned to trust these instincts. Recently, those instincts were tested once again when I moved into a new home. An old place with a past, though nothing overtly sinister. The house is older, but full of charm, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of a small town in Oregon, bordered by dense woods. The previous owner, an elderly woman, had passed away peacefully in her sleep. At some point, another owner had hoarded animals on the property, which left a mark, but the animals were well taken care of. Despite the past, I couldn't pinpoint anything in the home's history that would explain the strange occurrences that started after I moved in. It started slow, shadows, odd smells, and sounds that didn't quite belong. My two rescue dogs, Luna and Scout, were the first to notice. Luna, a large, shaggy mix with severe hip problems, began following me everywhere, despite the pain it caused her. She would whimper or howl if I left her sight. Scout, my loyal pit bull mix, took on a protective stance, always positioning herself between me and the doors, especially when I came near the kitchen. The kitchen had a sliding glass door that led to the backyard, which bordered the woods. Neither dog wanted me near that door, and Scout would physically block my path if I tried to get close. Soon after, I began noticing an earthy, damp smell around the house, especially near the backyard. It wasn't unpleasant, just odd, like the scent of decaying leaves or wet tree bark. Sometimes it would turn acrid, strong enough to make me gag. The smell would come and go without explanation. Then the sounds started, scratching at the glass door, faint whimpers, even grunting noises late at night. At first, I assumed it was just local wildlife. Oregon's woods are full of raccoons and stray dogs, but there were no tracks, no signs of animals. The noises grew louder when I was alone, especially while brushing my teeth before bed. More than once, I stepped into the hallway to investigate, only to find nothing. The shadows followed too. At first, I thought they were just tricks of the light, shapeless movements seen through windows or reflections on the walls. But soon, I started seeing a distinct figure just at the edge of the trees. It looked like a large, hunched animal, dark and indistinct, hovering near the tree line. One day, curiosity got the better of me. I stepped into the kitchen, opened the sliding doors, and called out, thinking it was a stray dog. But as soon as I opened the door, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. My stomach dropped and I froze. The shadow seemed to turn toward me, its form folding in on itself as if it was more than just an animal. I couldn't move, paralyzed by fear, until Luna let out a howl that snapped me out of it. I slammed the door shut. Scout, hackles raised and growling, stood between me and the door, refusing to leave the room until I physically pulled her away. Shaken, I called animal control and reported a large, dark dog near the woods. 2 officers came to investigate but found nothing, except for a few faint paw prints near the tree line. They suggested I put up a fence and call them again if the animal returned. Months passed. I put up a fence and things seemed to calm down. Until one morning, I took Luna and Scout for an early walk, leaving a note for my sister-in-law, who was visiting with her twin boys. About 45 minutes into our walk, I received a frantic call from her. The twins had woken up screaming, and she'd seen a massive dark dog outside the window, standing inside the fenced yard. She described an overwhelming primal fear when she saw it. By the time she threw a blanket over the window and looked again, the animal was gone. When I rushed home, the acrid smell was back, stronger than before. Scout paced near the window, growling, while Luna stayed close to my sister-in-law and the twins, sniffing and licking them protectively. Animal control came again, but once more, they found no trace of the creature, leaving me with even more questions than answers. Since then, things have calmed. A 3rd rescue dog, Willow, has joined our family. While she doesn't react the same way as Luna and Scout, she avoids the woods and often joins them in their watchful patrols. The earthy smell still lingers at times, and faint sounds occasionally echo through the house, but the shadowy figure hasn't returned. The neighbors have had their own encounters. 2 kids once saw a large black dog with glowing yellow eyes following them near the fence. They described it as menacing, though they couldn't say why. Their mother initially blamed my dogs, but when she looked, she saw Luna, too old to match the description, and Scout, too timid to be menacing. I tried to rationalize everything, the smells, the sounds, the shadow, but my gut tells me otherwise. Something's not right. For now, I remain watchful, trusting my instincts and my dogs to alert me if the strange presence ever returns. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It was late November or early December when the first strange incident occurred. I live in a small town called Pine Ridge, Wyoming, and work in Cheyenne, about an hour away. During winter, the roads can be unpredictable, and it often takes longer to get home if there's snow or accidents. The long, dark nights are something you get used to living out here. In Wyoming, the winters feel like they last forever, and the cold is a constant companion. One evening, I stopped at a Walmart near my apartment. I don't recall what I needed, but I remember the time, just after 6 p.m., as I stepped out of my car. A strange sensation washed over me. It was like someone had placed their hand gently on my left shoulder and pressed down. I glanced around, but there was no one near me. It felt odd, like a brief, invisible touch, but there was nothing on my jacket that could explain it. I shrugged it off, assuming it was just stress from work and the long drive back home. The next evening, my phone buzzed while I was driving home. The roads were slick, so I waited until I reached my apartment to check the message. It was from my ex-husband. As soon as I saw his name, a sudden wave of emotion hit me. A sinking feeling in my chest made me anxious, like I already knew why he was reaching out. We hadn't been on the best terms since our separation, and I had made a request years ago to let me know if something happened to his grandmother, a woman I had grown very fond of despite the tension between us. I called him back, and before he even spoke, I asked, when and how? He told me his grandmother had passed away at 6 p.m. the previous evening. She had been doing something she loved, but her health had finally given out. She had always been stubborn about her smoking, even when it started affecting her. I'd always admired that about her. That's when it hit me, the pressure I'd felt on my shoulder, at the exact same time she passed. I couldn't explain it, but I was certain that it was her, reaching out to say goodbye. I shared the experience with my coworker. TT is Native American, and he told me something that struck me. According to his traditions, December and January were times when the spirits were especially active, a period he referred to as the season of shadows. He told me that during these months, the veil between the living and the departed is thinner. The idea made sense to me. Out here, in the isolation of winter, the world feels different. Shadows move in strange ways, and the air feels charged, as though something unseen is brushing past you, like a chill wind. One evening, I drove past the site of a fatal accident. As I glanced across the highway, I saw the shadow of a large bird sitting on the guardrail. It sent a chill down my spine that lingered all night. As the new year started, the strange occurrences began to fade, and things seemed to settle back into normal. But then, just a couple of weeks later, I felt that familiar, odd pressure on my shoulder once again. This time, I didn't pay it much attention. Life was busy, and I didn't want to dwell on it. But looking back, I wish I had. 2 days later, on a Saturday, I was out shopping with my fiance's mother, whom we all call Mom. We were trying to keep her distracted. Her own mother had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and wasn't expected to make it through the holidays. Mom had just returned from spending a month with her, helping take care of her as her condition worsened. We had stopped at Walmart again, and I went to use the restroom. When I returned, I found Mom clutching her phone, tears streaming down her face. She had just received the call. Her mother had passed away. She'd been in a coma for 48 hours before she peacefully slipped away. That's when it hit me, right around the time her mother had fallen unconscious. I had felt that strange pressure on my shoulder once again. I'm not sure what to make of these experiences. My mother has some Native American ancestry on her side, though I don't know much about it. These incidents leave me wondering about the connections between us, the living, and those who've passed on. It's as if messages or energy might pass between us in ways we can't fully understand, connecting us to something much bigger than we realize. This story takes place about 40 years ago when I was just a little kid. I'm 43 now, so I don't remember everything, but I'll share what I do remember and fill in the rest with what my parents told me later. At the time, my dad had just been stationed at Fort Benning, Georgia. While we waited for military housing, my family stayed in a small motel. I can't remember the exact name or location, but it had to have been close to the base since that's where my dad worked. The first strange thing happened one day while my mom and I were getting ready to go to the motel's swimming pool. I was in her bedroom just staring at the open closet when I suddenly said, "Stop smiling at me." My mom rushed in to see what was going on. I told her I could see a man's face on the shelf inside the closet. A tall man, wearing an old-fashioned military uniform. He had a broad smile, but his teeth and eyes were unnaturally white, almost glowing, and it made me feel uncomfortable. I didn't fully understand fear at that age, but I knew something wasn't right. Mom thought maybe someone had slipped into the room, so she quickly called me to leave with her, and we went to the pool. Afterward, she asked the motel manager to check the room, but of course no one was there. Later that evening, we came back, and I went into the bedroom again. As soon as I stepped inside, I pointed to the closet and started telling the man to stop smiling at me. Mom knew no one had been in the room. It had been checked. She came in and looked around, but saw nothing. When Dad got home, he checked too, moving things around in the closet to see if there was a reflection or a shadow that could be causing what I was seeing. But no matter what they did, the face didn't disappear. It stayed there, always smiling down at me from the shelf. Even my grandparents, who came to visit, couldn't see the face. But every time I entered that room, the man was still there smiling at me. I'd always point him out. His face, his smile, just like before. Eventually, we moved into a new house on the base, and thankfully, I didn't see the face there. But according to my parents, there were other strange incidents involving the same man in the years that followed. One evening, when we went to pick up my dad from his office, I pointed out a man standing near the building. My mom looked, but didn't see anyone. She later told me how uneasy it made her feel, and she hurried Dad so we could leave quickly. Another time, my mom and I were walking through an old cemetery during the day. I spotted the man again and told her, "Look, that man just fell down." My mom looked around, but we were the only ones there. I was between 3 and 6 years old during these incidents, though I don't remember seeing him beyond those early years in the motel. My mom always thought it was strange that I described him as a man in uniform, because as far as she knew, I hadn't met anyone who fit that description at the time. One thing that stayed with her was that the military base where my dad worked had a rich history. It had been used as a training camp during the Civil War. Maybe it was just a coincidence, or maybe it wasn't. Even now, after all these years, I still vividly remember that face in the closet, just his head, staring down at me with that unsettling smile. It's a memory that's lingered in my mind, even though everything else has faded away. In May of this year, I experienced a loss that changed everything. My partner passed away in a tragic accident while we were camping. His gun accidentally discharged as we slept, and he was gone in an instant. It was a day that shattered me. Some of my friends have asked why I would continue to use the camper after such a devastating loss. My response has always been that it was meant to be a place of solace and escape. I refuse to let tragedy rob me of that. Strangely, being in the camper, where he breathed his last, offers me a strange comfort. I know he would have wanted me to find peace there. As part of my healing, I decided to take the camper to a quiet spot about 90 minutes north of Tucson. I found a secluded location near the foothills of the Santa Catalina Mountains, offering breathtaking views of the desert. The area was peaceful, with many people living simple lives. Some were retirees, others full-time RVers, all seeking a slower pace of life. The tranquility here was exactly what I needed. Not long after settling in, I met a woman around my age at the campsite next to mine. She mentioned that 2 women, who lived in the campsite behind mine, would be returning that Saturday evening after visiting family in California. I thanked her and continued to settle in. That night, for the first time since my partner's passing, I lay down in the camper's bedroom. The room is at the back of the camper, with a window overlooking the campsite. My dog curled up next to me, and I soon drifted off to sleep. Sometime later, I was woken by the sound of tires crunching on gravel. The 2 women had returned. My dog sat up, eyes fixed on the window as I listened to them whispering and unloading their things. After a while, their door shut, and the camp fell silent. My dog relaxed and lay back down, and I soon drifted off again. But a short time later, I woke again to find my dog sitting upright and staring intently out the window, softly whining. Curious, I sat up and peered outside. Standing just a few feet beyond my camper, at the edge of the campsite, was a man. He was standing still, facing the darkened desert, not seeming to notice me. He had curly, blonde hair and was dressed in a t-shirt and shorts. I ducked down quickly, feeling strange for watching him. I assumed he was a visitor or a family member of the women, maybe out stargazing. After all, the area had clear skies, perfect for it. A few minutes later, I peeked out again. He was still there, unmoving, his gaze fixed far beyond the campsite. My dog, still watching, didn't growl or act aggressively. He simply observed. The next day, I met the two women who had returned. I asked if they had any visitors the previous night. They seemed confused and said no. I told them about the man I'd seen, and they seemed genuinely unsettled. One of them mentioned that they had a Ring camera set up on their camper since it was their full-time residence. They decided to review the footage from that night. When they checked the video, the camera had recorded motion for about 15 minutes. The footage clearly showed the back of my camper, but there was no man, no movement, no sign of anyone. I don't know who or what I saw. It wasn't my partner, and at the time, it didn't scare me because I thought it was just a person passing through. But looking back, it feels so strange. What's even stranger are the occurrences in the woods behind the campsite. People have reported seeing glowing orbs floating in the darkness, appearing and disappearing. The two women have mentioned hearing strange crying sounds coming from the woods at night. While there could be explanations for these things, the isolation and the eerie stillness of the area make them feel undeniably unsettling. After I shared my experience, one of the women told me she had taken care of it and assured me it wouldn't return. I didn't ask for details, but she is of Native American descent, part of the Hopi tribe, so perhaps she performed a ritual or prayer. Whatever she did, it seems to have worked. Since that night, I haven't seen the man or experienced anything else out of the ordinary. Back in 2015, I was working night shifts at a small remote hospital in Pine Creek, a quiet town tucked away in the heart of the Midwest. It wasn't anything like the bustling city hospitals you'd see on TV. The pace was slower, and the nights were eerily still. The hospital had two wings, one for regular patients and another for prisoners brought in from the nearby state prison. The prison wing was only opened when 5 or more prisoners were admitted at once, so most nights it sat dark and empty. On the rare occasions I had to run errands, like delivering lab samples or picking up supplies, it often meant venturing into the prisoner wing. From the first time I walked in there alone, I hated it. The air felt thick, like something, or someone, was watching me. I'd rush in, grab what I needed, and hurry out, but after a few trips, I refused to go alone. I always took someone with me after that. One night, I was walking to the lab by myself. As I passed the entrance to the prisoner wing, it was as dark and empty as always, but I couldn't shake that familiar unease. I quickened my pace, eager to get past it. On my way back, as I passed the entrance again, I heard it, a soft whistle. It was faint, almost playful, coming from deep inside the prison wing. I froze, my heart racing. I looked inside for just a second, but the room was completely empty. The whistling continued, though, like someone was standing there in the dark, whistling a tune. Who could be in there at this hour in the dead of night? I ran back to the unit, telling my coworkers what happened. They believed me, but none of them had ever heard anything like it. A couple of months later, during a slow summer night, something even stranger happened. Our patient load was light, and most of the staff was gathered at the front nurse's station, chatting to pass the time. One of the CNAs assigned to my patients went to the back nurse's station to do some charting, and I followed to speak with her. As I stood in front of her, I could see the empty patient rooms through the glass walls behind her. As we talked, something caught my eye. I stopped mid-sentence, my voice trailing off. Behind her, in one of the empty rooms, I saw a man in a hospital gown walking across the room. He wasn't a shadow or a trick of the light. He was solid, and I could see him clearly. The CNA noticed my expression and panicked, shouting, "What?" "What's going on?" She turned, thinking someone was standing behind her. I could barely get the words out, but I stammered, "There's a man in room 113. That room had been empty for days." I knew it. I ran to tell the other nurses, but when we checked, there was no patient in that room. We even double-checked the records to see if anyone had died there recently, but no one had. Later that night, the elderly housekeeper came in to clean. She overheard us talking about what I'd seen, and then she told us something that made my stomach churn. She said that every time she cleaned the prison wing alone, she heard someone whistling in there. I couldn't believe it. I told her about the whistling I had heard months before. Her story validated everything I'd experienced. But this wasn't the only strange thing I'd noticed in the hospital. Early on, I felt inexplicably drawn to one particular room near the front nurse's station. Sometimes, when I was walking past or charting, I'd catch a glimpse of a man standing in the doorway out of the corner of my eye. But every time I looked directly, there was no one there. It happened so often that I eventually mentioned it to a nurse who'd been there longer. She told me that a male patient had passed away in that very room shortly before I started working there. There's no logical explanation for any of these events, but they happened. Even now, years later, I still think about the man in room 113, the whistling, and those fleeting glimpses of someone in the doorway. Some nights, it felt like something was just lingering in that hospital. It was just after 2 a.m. this morning when I woke up to the sound of my dog barking from the living room. Normally, he's a little cuddle bug, always snuggled up next to me, but this time he was nowhere to be found. Half awake and still groggy, I called out for him to stop barking and come back to bed. After a moment, he jumped up onto the bed, but instead of curling up next to me, he sat upright, his body tense, staring at the bedroom door. His fur was bristled, like he was on high alert. Then, without warning, he bolted off the bed, as if he'd heard something I couldn't, and ran back into the other room. The barking started again, loud and insistent. What caught my attention was how, despite the doggy door I've had installed, he didn't make a move toward it. If there had been a raccoon or even a person in the yard, he would have charged straight out. But not this time. He stayed inside, barking like he was trying to warn me about something. I decided to check it out, though I didn't want to make too much noise. I moved through the house quietly, avoiding the lights, and followed the sound of his barking to the sliding glass doors in the living room. My dog was standing there, fixated on the yard. I peered outside, trying to figure out what could be causing this commotion. At first, I saw nothing, just the overgrown ivy climbing up the fence. And then I saw it. Near the corner of the yard, close to the wall of my bedroom, stood a tall, dark figure. It was too tall to be anyone I knew, and the shape of the hat, it looked like a wide-brimmed fedora, sent a chill down my spine. My heart pounded as I stood frozen, my eyes locked on the silhouette. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, motionless, and I had an overwhelming feeling that it was staring directly at me. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone. It didn't fade away or shuffle off. It was simply there 1 second, and the next, it vanished into thin air. My dog kept barking, but I was too paralyzed to move. The air felt thick and heavy, as if something had shifted in the atmosphere. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had seen wasn't just a figment of my imagination. I managed to step back and retreat to my bedroom, my legs shaky. I crawled under the covers, still rattled by what had just happened, but somehow I managed to drift back to sleep. My dog followed me and stayed quiet for the rest of the night. When the sun came up, I went to the sliding glass door again to see if maybe there was some logical explanation, perhaps a shadow from the tree or a pile of yard furniture. But there was nothing there, not a single thing that could explain the figure, and even if there had been, it wouldn't explain why my dog had reacted the way he did. I've been thinking about it all day. The thing is, I've been through a lot in the past few months. Just this past Memorial Day, I lost my partner in a terrible accident, and my dad's health has been declining rapidly, so maybe I'm just seeing things. But it feels more than that. Could this shadow figure be connected to the loss I've experienced? Or was it something else entirely? Maybe it had a deeper meaning. Or maybe it was just something I'll never understand. I'm not writing this for sympathy, but I do want to know what this shadow was. It's left an impression on me that I can't shake. The Whispering Shadows Hotel stands as one of the oldest landmarks in the heart of Pine Lake, a small town that feels more like a memory than a place. The hotel's construction began in 1927, and it still operates today, though its charm has only grown darker with time. Rumor has it that scenes from a classic horror film were shot here, adding to the hotel's eerie reputation. A few years ago, I attended my niece's art show, which was held in what locals now call the Phantom Room. This lounge, once an elegant bar on the ground floor, has since been shut off to the public, but at the time, it perfectly matched the atmosphere of the event. The hotel once boasted a lively history, drawing in Hollywood stars seeking refuge from the world outside. Marilyn Monroe, to name one, was a frequent guest, always requesting a room near the garden to avoid the prying eyes of the press. Over the years, stories of paranormal activity have haunted the hotel's history. Whispers of restless spirits and strange occurrences. It's even become a popular spot for ghost hunters who reserve rooms for overnight investigations. That evening, I arrived early to appreciate the art exhibits and enjoy the fashion show that followed. The creativity on display was extraordinary. After the event, I decided to take some time to explore the historic hotel. I stepped into the old brass elevator, its gears creaking, and rode it up to the upper floors. The hallways felt like a step back in time, with ancient wallpaper peeling slightly and the smell of dust in the air. Some rooms had plaques commemorating famous guests, and the walls were adorned with black and white photographs of the town, captured decades ago. I could almost see the old horse-drawn carts along the cobblestone streets. I eventually found myself on the third floor, the floor that everyone in town whispered about. As I wandered, admiring the old photos, I suddenly heard faint music. It was big band music, distorted, crackling, like it was coming from an ancient radio. The sound would fade in and out, accompanied by a brief static burst before returning. I assumed it was part of the hotel's vintage charm, maybe some old speakers playing period music to match the decor. It seemed like a nice touch, a reminder of the past. But the further I walked down the hall, the more persistent the music became. It seemed to come from the ceiling, though I couldn't see any speakers. The sound was like it was being played from somewhere far away, out of sight. I didn't think much of it and decided to call it a night. As I waited at the front desk for valet to retrieve my car, I casually mentioned to the woman working there how much I enjoyed the music on the third floor. Her face instantly changed. She stared at me for a moment before shaking her head. "There's no music in the hallways," she said, her voice low. "You must have had an experience." She paused before admitting that she refused to even step foot on the third floor. It was known to be the most haunted part of the hotel. I left feeling unsettled. Had I really heard something otherworldly? This was an active hotel, after all. Could it have been from a guest room? But what were the odds of multiple TVs all playing the same music at the same time, creating the strange effect I heard? Later, I dug deeper into the history of the hotel. It turned out a big band conductor used to stay there frequently after performing at the nearby town theater. The more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed that the music only played on the third floor. Whether it was a ghostly echo of the past or just a bizarre coincidence, it's a memory that still lingers in my mind. My name's Sarah, and I'm 23 years old. I've always been sensitive to the supernatural, spirits, energies, strange occurrences, you name it. I've got plenty of stories from my childhood, but I'll save those for another time. Over the last few years, there have been several unsettling experiences that have stuck with me. For a while, my boyfriend lived on a military base near a small town in northern Arizona. His house was tucked away in a cul-de-sac near the edge of the base, and I always felt uneasy whenever I drove through that area. Right where the road curves, I've seen what I can only describe as a soldier standing beneath the streetlights. He's about average height, dressed in military fatigues, and just standing there, motionless. When I say I see him, I don't mean with my eyes. I see him in my mind's eye. Even though my boyfriend has since moved to a different part of the base, we still have friends who live there. Every time I pass that street, I get this strange, lingering feeling. Another experience happened just outside that same neighborhood. There's this small thrift store along the road leading to the local youth center, and it's been there for years. I think it used to be a gas station. On the outside, there's a water machine, a soda vending machine, and a Redbox kiosk. I stop by that Redbox often after work, usually around 7 p.m. when the sun has already set. It's a quiet, dark spot, and the area feels empty at night. A few times I've seen a large shape moving across the parking lot toward the far side of the store. It's hard to say if it's an animal or something human-like, but it's huge, way bigger than a dog or a javelina. The weird part? As soon as it reaches the streetlight near the dumpster, it just disappears. Every time I go to check afterward, there's nothing there. This has happened to me about 3 times, and it always leaves me wondering what it was. But the last experience I want to share is by far the most terrifying. It also happened on the base, but this time near the flight line. It was about 1 a.m., and I was on my way to visit my boyfriend at his hangar while he worked an overnight shift. At the end of the main road that runs through the base, there's a 4-way stop. As you get closer to the hangars, the lights get dimmer, and it's really dark. At that hour, I was the only car on the road. When I pulled up to the stop sign, I glanced out my driver's side window and saw a man standing there. His face was twisted in fear, as if he was about to be hit by a car. Without thinking, I put my car in park, jumped out, and looked around, but there was no one there. The road was completely empty. My heart was pounding, and I quickly got back in my car and drove away. In all the years I've had strange encounters, this was the only time I've ever clearly seen someone's face, and it still haunts me. So yeah, that's the first part of my strange experiences. There are more, but these are the ones that stick with me the most. Before I continue, let me give you a little background about my friend Emily. She's a witch and has always been open to spirits and energies, much like me. She has tons of stories, but I'll start with one that happened not too long ago. We live about 30 minutes from a well-known tourist spot. The road leading to it is winding, dark, and poorly lit at night. For safety reasons, I won't say where it is, but it's also a popular hangout for local car groups who like to race and drift after dark. I'll admit, it's a good road for that sort of thing. One evening, Emily went for a drive down that road to clear her head. She was on the phone with another friend, chatting through her car's speaker system. As she got closer to the gate at the end of the road, her phone signal started cutting out. That's pretty common in that area, so it wasn't surprising when the call eventually dropped. She immediately tried calling her friend back, but all she got was static. That's when an overwhelming sense of dread came over her. Feeling uneasy, she turned the car around and headed back toward the main road. Once she was back in an area with better cell service, she successfully called her friend again and asked him about the earlier call attempts. His response was strange. He told her she hadn't called him back at all. He even sent a screenshot of his call logs, and there was no record of a second call. But when Emily checked her phone, it showed that the call had gone through. Both of their logs told completely different stories, and to this day, neither of them can explain it. Back in December of 2020, I had an experience of my own. I was driving along a mountain road to kill some time before picking up my roommate from the airport. If you haven't guessed by now, my friends and I enjoy taking long, scenic drives. It was around 9:30 p.m., and the road was completely deserted. There was no one in front of me, no one behind me, not even the faintest glow from distant headlights. With no traffic, I had my high beams on. About halfway down the trail, I saw something, or someone, on the right side of the road. It was a woman walking away from me. She was dressed in a strange, thick off-white outfit that reminded me of something from an old-time movie. She had dishwater blonde hair, worn loose, and sandals on her feet. Her head was bowed, and her posture seemed almost defeated. The odd part is that I saw her, not with my eyes, but with my mind's eye. When I blinked, she was gone. It didn't make sense for anyone to be out there at that hour, dressed like that. Arizona gets surprisingly cold in the winter, and that night it was nearly freezing. Sandals and thin clothing just didn't add up. I don't live in Flagstaff or anywhere that gets regular snow, but it was still far too cold for someone to be walking along a deserted mountain road, especially at that hour. I can't explain who or what I saw, but that image of her has stayed with me. Was it just my mind playing tricks, or was it something else? These are just a few of the strange experiences I've had, and they still leave me wondering about the unknown. Whether it's all in my head or something more supernatural, I don't think I'll ever really know, but these moments have left an impression on me that I won't forget. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. Growing up, I spent much of my childhood moving between various military bases and a quiet little town called Maple Ridge, Virginia. Maple Ridge is a rural area tucked just north of Charlottesville. My mother had a large family, with me being number 8 out of 12 children. The youngest, a girl, was born in the summer of 1970. At the time, my father had been reassigned to Germany in late 1969, but my mother, never one to leave the comfort of her roots, decided to stay at her childhood home in Maple Ridge until he returned. He didn't come back to the U.S. until 3 years later. My baby sister was the only child in a house always full of relatives and visitors. When she was about a year old, she started talking about someone she called the old man. She said she often saw him standing in the corner of the living room, and sometimes she even asked us to move out of his way so he could pass by. We never saw him, of course, but we just went along with it, thinking it was one of her childhood games. In the summer of 1972, my father returned home, and we moved to a small house on a base in Fort Lee, Virginia. While my mother was busy unpacking boxes and settling in, she came across some old family photographs, ones that had been hidden away in dusty drawers for years. My little sister, now 2 years old, pointed to one photo in particular and asked my mother, "Is the old man tired? Is that why he's lying down?" The picture she was looking at was of my grandfather, my mother's father, who had passed away in 1961. He had died 9 years before my sister was even born. My mother froze for a moment, the connection startling her. It was then we began to wonder if my sister's old man might have been my grandfather all along, though there was no way to confirm it. My sister's comment about the photo made us realize something else too. Before his death, my grandfather had suffered 2 strokes, and in his final days, he spent a lot of time sitting in his favorite chair by the window. We used to run around the house, sometimes begging for change to buy candy from the local store. He used a walker to get around, and would often tell us to move so he could pass by. My sister's description of him matched this perfectly. To her, he was still there. She couldn't understand why we couldn't see him. To her, he was just another part of her world, sitting in his chair, using his walker, moving around like he always had. After that day, my sister never mentioned the old man again. The photo remained visible in the living room, but she never asked about him again. What still confuses us is that the term old man wasn't one we ever used in our family. We're African American, and that wasn't how we spoke about our elders. To this day, we can't fully explain it, but it's a memory that lingers with all of us, one that we can't forget, even after all these years. I spent most of my life in Georgia, but from 1993 to 1996, my sister and I lived with our father and stepmother in a small town called Litchfield Park, Arizona. The move was sudden and unsettling. forced by a domestic situation in Georgia that had escalated too far. The authorities stepped in, contacted my father, and before I knew it, we were boarding a flight to Arizona with nothing but the clothes on our backs. Before that, I had always been a good student. School was my refuge, a way to escape the chaos at home. But everything changed once I started high school in Arizona. My mind was constantly preoccupied with thoughts of the life I'd left behind, and my grades, especially in math, began to suffer. My father, whom I'd always had a complicated relationship with, didn't help matters. He was a brilliant man, creative and intellectually sharp, working as an instructor at a nuclear power plant. Despite his intelligence, he was emotionally volatile and quick to say things he later regretted, making our relationship tense and difficult, a dynamic that still lingers to this day. There's one thing he said to me that I can't forget. If you get another bad grade in math, you'll be sorry. Coming from the turmoil I just escaped in Georgia, those words could mean anything. The fear of what sorry might mean only made it harder for me to concentrate. My grades continued to decline, and the thought of facing him with them filled me with dread. At the time, students from Litchfield Park attended Agua Fria Union High School in Avondale, just a short bus ride away. The day I had to bring home my report card, I couldn't face the ride back. I imagined the confrontation that awaited me and decided to put off returning home for as long as possible. I lingered around the school, hoping that if I waited until dark, my dad's worry would outweigh his anger. It wasn't my proudest moment, but it seemed like the only way out. I ended up wandering behind some old buildings, away from the main road, the sun still high in the sky, but the area feeling strangely quiet and eerie. As I walked deeper, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. A massive pile of shoes, hundreds of them, stacked in a heap, each one carefully paired as if someone had gone out of their way to arrange them. The pile stood about 50 feet from the nearest building, almost as if it had appeared out of nowhere. I stepped closer, my curiosity piqued, intending to walk around the pile to get a better look. But just as I was about to get too close, a loud, commanding voice suddenly boomed, "Stop." I froze. The voice didn't come from anywhere nearby. I was completely alone. The sun still bathed the area in light, and I could see there was no one around. The voice, however, felt close, almost as if it had come from the pile of shoes itself. I could feel the vibrations of the sound in my chest. Startled, I jumped back, and as soon as I did, the top of the pile shifted and tumbled slightly, though I hadn't touched it. Terrified, I ran. I didn't stop until I reached a small, decaying wooden fence between two buildings. My panic drove me to crash straight through the brittle fence, tumbling onto the street on the other side. Moments later, a police patrol car pulled up, and the officers asked what I was doing. I panicked and told them I'd missed the bus, a plausible excuse in the days before cell phones. When they took me home, I had no choice but to explain everything to my father. I admitted I'd been too scared to show him my report card, and when I told him about the pile of shoes and the mysterious voice, he dismissed it with a shrug. "It was just your subconscious playing tricks on you. You know I only want the best for you." How could I trust that? After everything I'd been through in Georgia, I had no faith left in adults. To me, trusting anyone had always felt dangerous. Despite everything, I was punished for my bad grades. My father made me pick up rotten lemons that had fallen from the trees in the backyard, buzzing with flies. But he didn't punish me for doubting him. If he even remembered the incident at all, he never brought it up again. That day, the memory of the pile of shoes and the strange voice lingered in my mind. But it was also the day I realized that trust wasn't something I was ready to give. Not yet.